Good morning. The Committee on Education and Labor will come to order. Welcome to everyone, and I note that a quorum is present. Committee is meeting today to hear testimony on examining the policies and priorities of the United States Department of Education. This is an entirely remote hearing, and as such, the committee's hearing room is officially closed. All microphones will be kept muted as a general rule to avoid unnecessary background noise. Members and the witnesses will be responsible for unmuting themselves when they are recognized to speak or when they wish to seek recognition. If a member or the witness experiences technical difficulties during the hearing, please stay connected to the platform. Make sure you're muted and use your phone to immediately call the committee's IT director, whose number was provided in advance. Should the chair experience any technical difficulties or need to step away, another majority member is hereby authorized to assume the gavel in the chair's absence. In order to ensure that the committee's 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's field timer, which appears in its own thumbnail picture and will show a blinking light when time is up. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and ranking member. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. 2 days ago, 19 children and 2 educators were gunned down in an elementary school in Texas. Regrettably, this is too common an occurrence in this country, and according to Education Week, we have suffered 27 school shootings already this year alone. We could have prevented a lot of these if elected leaders valued children and families more than guns. And instead of time and time again, Congress has failed to act to enact any sensible or widely supported proposals to respond to these strategies and prevent another one from happening. Today, I call on each of us as members of the Committee on Education and Labor to do everything we can to protect schools and communities from gun violence and to ensure that this most recent tragedy will be the last. I therefore ask everyone to join me in a moment of silence to honor the students and educators who have died and their loved ones and the entire school community in Texas. Thank you. Secretary Cardona, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to hearing your testimony on how we can help students recover from the pandemic and succeed. Today, 99% of our schools are open for full-time, in-person learning 5 days a week. The safe reopening of America's public schools would not have been possible without the President's American Rescue Plan, which delivered the largest one-time federal investment in K-12 education in our nation's history. And importantly, this funding was distributed using the Title 1A formula, so the greatest resources went to the communities with greatest need. There are expenses that schools need to open safely, like fixing dilapidated or improperly working ventilation systems. This is an airborne pandemic. Making sure they have more transportation. You can't pack as many students on a bus during an airborne pandemic. You have to hire counselors and nurses during the pandemic, PPE, things that were not in the budget when the schools began before the pandemic. And so to open safely, they needed the resources, and the American Rescue Plan provided the resources so that schools could open safely. Schools have used these relief funding to cover the cost of implementing school-based COVID-19 testing, upgrading ventilation systems, and hiring additional staff to reduce the capacity in classrooms and buses. And importantly, the rescue plan has also required at least 20% of the funding to go towards strategies to address learning loss and closing achievement gaps. The achievement gaps, as everyone knows, were exacerbated during the pandemic. To do so, school districts in my community and across the country have extended school days, hired counselors, and offered comprehensive after-school and summer programs. Schools are also using this funding to develop innovative programs that are helping students not only make up for lost learning, but also prepare for the modern economy. Last month, I visited a new STEM resource lab in my district where elementary school students we're programming robots to maneuver an obstacle course. This is just one example of how investments in students and educators can create new opportunities in schools that help all students succeed. But regrettably, for too long, not all students have had the support they need to reach their full potential. For example, in our K through 12 schools, Black students, boys, students with disabilities, and others face harsher disciplinary practices at disproportionately higher rates. In our institutions of higher education, there continues to be a prevalence of sexual assault and harassment and a lack of accountability of the institutions to safeguard the students. So I'm pleased that in response, the Biden-Harris administration has collected data as an initial step to help inform schools in addressing disparities in school disciplinary practices. And I'm looking forward to seeing a new Title IX rule that will improve protections and support survivors of sexual harassment and discrimination that can be done without violating fundamental due process protections for the accused. Finally, the federal student loans are critical. Federal student loans are critical to expanding access to the benefits of a quality higher education for all students. However, over the past few decades, it has become increasingly clear that our students are taking on a lot more loans than in the past, and that our student loan system must be improved to fulfill its promise. This is why the Biden administration has taken historic steps to forgive more than $17 billion in debt for 725,000 borrowers, and to ensure that our student loan program puts borrowers' needs first. And since the beginning of the pandemic, we have ensured that borrowers of federally held student loans were spared from making payments on their loans and accruing interest on them. The administration has also provided temporary changes to expand access to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program during the pandemic. Already, the administration has been given $6.8 billion in debt, covering more than 113,000 loans through this program. This includes $233 million in debt forgiveness for roughly 4,000 borrowers in my home state of Virginia. Simply put, the Department of Education under the Biden administration has taken historic steps to get us back on track. However, we know that there's more that still needs to be done. To that end, I look forward to hearing how the president's budget proposal will strengthen our continued progress to help every student reap the lifelong benefits of a high quality education. So in addition to whatever the administration is going to do with loan discharges, we need to make sure that we significantly increase the Pell Grant to restore it to its historic value, eliminate or simply or significantly reduce interest on loans, make the public service loan forgiveness and interest-based programs more generous, promote short-term Pell so that you can use your Pell Grant for job training programs as well as college courses that lead to a degree. We need to make sure that those are just the beginning to make sure that college is accessible to all. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your time today and your work in support of our nation's students. And I'm now pleased to recognize the ranking member, Dr. Fox, for the purpose of making her opening statement. Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. It's good to see you. There are no right words to describe the heartbreaking and horrific tragedy that happened at Robb Elementary School. I thank the chairman for having a moment of silence at the beginning. We as a nation are devastated by the loss of so many precious lives. My prayers are with the victims, their fellow students, families, colleagues, and the community of Uvalde, Texas. We must be thoughtful about how we discuss and handle school safety and mental health issues. Federal changes should not be made in haste, and there are still many details we do not know as the investigation continues. Mr. Chairman, as I've said before, we stand ready to work with you to examine the federal programs under our jurisdiction to help families, schools, and communities prevent these tragedies from occurring. And while we keep Uvalde in our prayers, we'll move forward with the business at hand today. Mr. Secretary, I wish this was going to be a hearing of great agreement and examples of our working together. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. The Biden administration has promised to enact unpopular and inexpensive mass student loan forgiveness by executive fiat. But anyone who looks at what the Department of Education has done over the past year can see that blanket student loan forgiveness is already well underway. First, the Education Department expanded the Public Service Loan Forgiveness PSLF program well beyond the narrow limits set by Congress. In a letter sent to you last October, I criticized the department for turning this already expensive program into, quote, open-ended loan forgiveness, end quote, for millions of borrowers. But this isn't the only vehicle this administration has used to smuggle in mass student loan forgiveness. The department also waived the requirements for income-driven repayment plans, canceling debt for ineligible borrowers under the guise of targeted forgiveness. According to the department, that means potentially wiping the student loan balances for more than 4 million borrowers, many of whom have incomes well beyond that of the individuals these programs were intended to help. The administration is right on one thing: these programs are broken. It's hard to justify to taxpayers that they should pour more money into a program forgiving nearly $200 billion in loans for graduate students, or programs like PSLF, which forgives an average $100,000 in forgiveness per borrower, a third of whom are making well into six figures. We need programs that protect borrowers and taxpayers, not unsustainable programs that will exacerbate the ballooning prices colleges and universities charge students. It was clear that student loan cancellation was on the horizon when President Biden took office. His continual extensions of the student loan repayment pause, which have already cost taxpayers over $100 billion, were a signal that mass forgiveness was on the way. Never mind the fact that Biden's skyrocketing inflation is disproportionately harming those who never went to college, the very same individuals expected to foot the bill for Biden's loan forgiveness. Yet President Biden insists on going even further and is reportedly moving towards blanket forgiveness to the tune of $10,000 per borrower without congressional authorization. Further, forgiving student loans to try and win back some voters while alienating the 2/3 of Americans without baccalaureate degrees cuts directly against our shared goal of unifying the country. Moreover, what does loan forgiveness do for the millions of students taking out loans tomorrow? It doesn't lower college costs, nor does it improve student outcomes. It simply exacerbates the problems of our higher education system, which is in desperate need of reform. And Mr. Secretary, I stand ready to work with you, the president, and my Democrat colleagues to fix it. Let's tackle these issues and deliver meaningful bipartisan reform that will lower college costs, ensure students graduate with affordable debt, and increase college completion so we can set students up for success. Mass student loan forgiveness is not the answer. It would break the federal government's commitment to taxpayers that providing access to higher education will benefit every American by making those who took out loans a priority over those who did not go to college or those who paid for college without borrowing money. Indeed, the loan program provides millions of low and middle income borrowers the opportunity to move up the income ladder, but instituting massive student loan forgiveness makes this program unsustainable. Surely, last-minute political gambles are not worth undermining our ability to provide educational opportunities to those who otherwise would not have them. And unfortunately, My concerns with the Department of Education extend far beyond its higher education agenda. We've seen this administration disrespect parents. When the National School Boards Association insinuated parents were the problem, I was shocked when the Department of Justice issued a memo basically endorsing that view. And I was extremely disappointed your department didn't rally to stand up for parents. Schools should be in partnership with parents, not just trying to cast them aside. I also have concerns about your continued push to end or limit as much as possible school choice. From the DC Choice Program to your charter school rule, you favored teacher unions over families, and often over families desperate for an education that gives their child the opportunity to achieve lifelong success. Finally, I fear your coming rewrite of the regulations on Title IX will only exacerbate parents' frustration and mistrust by ratifying a worldview that denies basic science, treats parents as an obstacle, and seeks to undermine the very opportunities for girls that Title IX has helped protect and expand. Finally, conducting robust oversight and holding the executive branch accountable for how it spends taxpayer dollars and administers the law are critical for a functioning and strong government. Action without proper oversight and transparency leads to unlawful and careless actions. Unfortunately, your agency has been unhelpful and downright obstructive at times. Mr. Secretary, we cannot tackle these issues successfully if we do not work together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I will. Thank you. Without objection, all other members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. on June 9th, 2022. I'll now introduce our distinguished witness. The Honorable Miguel Cardona is the 12th Secretary of the Department of Education. He previously served as Commissioner of Education for the state of Connecticut, and he has 2 decades of experience as a public school educator in his hometown of Meridian, Connecticut. He holds a bachelor's degree from Central Connecticut State University, a master's degree, a 6-year certificate, advanced certificate, and a doctorate in education from the University of Connecticut. We appreciate, Mr. Secretary, for you participating today and look forward to your testimony. Your written statement will appear in full in the hearing record, and you're asked to limit your oral presentation to approximately five minutes. And after your presentation, we'll move to members' questions. The witness is aware of his responsibility to provide accurate information to the committee, and therefore will proceed directly to his testimony. Secretary Cardona.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Fox, members of this distinguished committee. Good afternoon, and thank you. I'll do my best to answer questions on the budget, to tell you that this proposal will be our best tool to address inequities, the best tool to provide pathways to college, and to help our country recover from the pandemic. But I'd be failing you as Secretary of Education if I didn't tell you how ashamed I am that we as a country are becoming desensitized to the murder of children. I'd be failing you as a Secretary of Education if I didn't use this platform to say that students and teachers and school leaders are scared. That after Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Parkland, after each of these and the many other massacres, we as educators did our best to look parents in the eyes and assure them that we'll do everything to protect their babies. After each of these massacres, we've held staff trainings, active shooter drills. We've numbered our windows for easier access for law enforcement. We've improved online early detection screening tools, and we've secured our entrances and perimeters. That is no match for what we're up against. That was no match for Irma Garcia and no match for Eva Mireles and those 19 beautiful souls. Educators across the country have and would give their lives to protect children, but damn it, That's not enough. Unless you've gone to a funeral of a child, you'll never know. We can do better and we must do better. Para las familias de Texas, te acompaño en sus sentimientos y estaré aquí luchando para ustedes. There are no words. As parents, protecting our children is more important than anything else. As an educator, helping children grow and thrive, that's our calling. But we need help, and we need help now. I'll transition to the purpose of this hearing, but don't think for 1 second that my focus today and the focus of all of my team at the United States Department of Education is on anything but how we can better serve the students of Uvalde, Texas, and their grieving families. Let's not normalize this. Let's use every ounce of influence that we have to get something done to help prevent this from happening again. The time for thoughts and prayers alone is over. We need action. Americans are looking to us to solve difficult problems. We should be humbled by this opportunity to make a more perfect union. We need to do better. Our kids deserve better. Let's find a path forward. Today's hearing is about more than President Biden's proposed investments for education in the fiscal year 2023. It's about the needs of our students and how we can meet them if we do work together. The priorities in this budget reflect what I've learned visiting 32 states across America. I visited small towns, affluent suburbs, urban and rural communities, including tribal communities. Addressing opportunity and achievement gaps that were made worse in the pandemic is more important now than ever. Let's close opportunity gaps by investing in our Title I schools. This is the best tool we have for reducing inequities between underfunded schools and their wealthier counterparts. Let's also invest in full-service community schools, which provide high-poverty communities easier access to services for health, for nutrition, for enrichment, adult education, and much more. In a recent visit to New Mexico, I met with students struggling with anxiety and depression, with trauma from losing parents amid the pandemic. Our children are hurting. Anxiety and depression have doubled among youth. Teen suicide rates are on the rise. Let's invest $1 billion in hiring staff and building their skill sets to support students' mental health needs so they can be their best in their classroom. I've met with principals and superintendents in red states and in blue states trying to fill vacancies so teachers could spend more time supporting the individualized needs that we know our students have. They need help. We are proposing $350 million for recruiting and retaining teachers. The profession is in crisis, and we have a solution. I travel the country listening to parents, to students and families. Families are concerned with recovery. They're concerned with their kids' reading level in school. They're concerned with getting back to school and not letting politics divide the classroom. Our parents want their children to learn. The American Rescue Plan got us this far. We went from 46% of our schools fully open when the plan passed to over 99% of our schools fully open now. With your investments, let's build more inclusive, affordable pathways to higher education and rewarding careers for all of our students. Our budget calls for investments in community colleges, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and other inclusive institutions. And let's increase Pell by $1,775 for 23 so that more kids can get to college across America. We're proposing $200 million for career-connected learning so more underserved students graduate high school with the industry credentials and the college credits that they need. High school students across the country need more options. We have a plan. Look, education gave me the tools to achieve the American dream. I grew up in a blue-collar community of Meriden. I only had what my public schools offered me. I attended a Title I school and graduated from a technical high school. I became a first-gen college student. I'm a bilingual certified educator who benefited from quality teacher preparation and professional development. I am a product of the investments in this budget. Education brought the promise of this country alive for me. We must renew that promise for today's students and those to come. And for the last 2 years, we were tested in ways we could never imagine before. We persevered through with a sense of urgency, collaboration at the local level, and a focus on our students. We are now challenged in a different way. We must work together to protect children with a greater sense of urgency and collaboration at the federal level. Our students are watching. Let's not let them down. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we go to number of questions, and I'd like to first recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us. I appreciated your comments and associate myself with your opening comments regarding the tragedy that has unfolded and the need for us to do something to protect children and protect their well-being in the sanctity of a school. And I appreciate those comments. I want to ask just a couple of general questions on two topics. One is adult education. Secretary, adult education plays a critical role in helping immigrants and refugees and other families gain English literacy so that those skills are necessary to fully participate in their schools and in their kids' education. The department, what are we doing in the budget and to ensure that funding for adult education and literacy programs are available?
Thank you, Congressman Grijalva. I certainly agree that when we talk about reimagining education, we really need to make sure we're investing in providing opportunities for our adults that want to go back to school or want to finish their program. We ask in our proposal for a $50 million increase to support competitive grants to do just that, a college bridge initiative. For folks who don't have a high school degree or equivalency, it's important that we provide pathways for all Americans to get back into education. And our adult education population is critical. If we're going to meet the demand that's out there for these careers that exist now, we need our adult education population to be prepared to be successful. Our budget does ask for that. There's also $10 million for a new initiative for disconnected youth to re-engage them in school. We know that earning potential is greater when completion happens at the in high school, but also in college. So we do have a robust plan for engaging our adult learners.
The loss of classroom teachers, particularly aggravated, even more so with the pandemic. It's leaving gaping holes in Arizona. 31% of the teaching positions at the beginning were gone and became vacant. 47%, almost 48% of those persons filling it, those positions lack basic qualifications. And if 1 in 3 teachers leave our education system, it'll take years to recover. I'm excited about infusion of funding into that area to retain teachers. Can you elaborate on that point, if you don't mind, sir?
Yes, thank you. We are very close to a crisis, Congressman, with regard to the shortage of teachers across our country. I know in Arizona, this is the case. When I visited, we talked about that. Across the country, we're seeing this. We believe we need to invest now and act now to promote programs that provide through lines between high school students to colleges and back into the classroom for our students. We need to invest in this, and we put in our proposal $350 million to make sure we're recruiting and retaining teachers, lifting up programs in states like Arizona that are aiming to increase the number of qualified teachers. And that's critical to qualified teachers in our classrooms. We saw what happened in January when many of our schools had to close due to the Omicron surge and teachers were in quarantine. It impacts the entire community when parents have to learn 2-3 days before that schools are going to be closed for a week. I don't want to go there. In our proposal, we have funds intending to create grow your own programs and to lift up programs that are aiming to recruit teachers. This investment will go a long way to improving education across the country.
And just in general, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think I just wanted to compliment the Secretary inheriting a department that basically needed, in many instances, rebuilding and renewal. I appreciate the comprehensive approach in the budget, particularly around Title I and Justice 40 initiatives that are within it and how that's going to be monitored. But yesterday I went to a graduation of my grandson from 5th grade to middle school, and I saw all those kids. They're all the same age as the kids that died and were slaughtered in Uvalde. And I saw them, and I saw my grandson there, and I saw their teachers giving them out their certificates, no different from the teachers that were murdered in Uvalde. And I think we all can relate to that. And I hope that this budget is respected for what it's trying to do, to rebuild our public infrastructure, the most important one we have, which is educating our kids. With that, I yield back, sir.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from our distinguished ranking member of the full committee, Dr. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, FSA, an office you are ultimately responsible for overseeing, allowed thousands of individuals and families' information be shared with Facebook, shared without any disclosure to families, and apparently unknown to the department. To add to the concern, it's fairly evident your staff is either hiding the extent of the information shared, or perhaps worse, doesn't even know. We've been seeking answers about this incident, but are now being told the earliest we can hear about the extent of this problem is June 3rd. Enough is enough, Mr. Secretary. This is a concern to many families and could impede students from applying for assistance if they do not trust the system or agency they have to provide sensitive information to. We've sent an invitation to the COO Cordray to appear at a roundtable to discuss the issue. Will you commit to his attendance?
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that. And let me tell you, I share with you the importance of this department.
Yeah, I just need a yes or no. I just need a yes or no.
Just a yes or no, Dr. Fox. Yes, we're going to be very transparent with you and everyone else. And my staff did provide an update last week, but let me just share, you're absolutely right. In the last administration, information was shared that wasn't supposed to. When we learned, the moment we learned about this, we put an end to it and we started an investigation to make sure we found out why that happened during the last administration. And we're being very transparent. As you mentioned, we are going to be having public information on that shared with you as soon as possible. And we're going to share, I think as early as next week, with you all what we're finding. We did provide an update last week because this is important to us, but rest assured, the moment we found out about this, we put an end to it.
Okay. Well, I have several other questions, so I need to get through them. Last time you testified before this committee, I asked if you and your staff would respond, quote, thoroughly and quickly, end quote, to oversight requests by this committee, to which you answered a resounding yes. Additionally, your undersecretary sat in the witness chair and assured all of us that we get all unredacted reports and relevant documents by the end of December 2021. To date, we've not received the complete, validated, and unredacted loan valuation reports that you previously said you stand by. These reports have found that the loan program was $435 billion in the red, even before the radical policies your department has enacted. Thankfully, despite your department's continued attempts to stonewall Congress and GAO, it seems we may finally get some answers. GAO has been persistent in looking at the issue closely to show the American people exactly what a catastrophe the loan program has become as a result of Democrat policies. Mr. Secretary, simply put, you've fallen short of your promises when you were sitting here last year. However, I want to give you another chance to make good on your word. Will you confirm today that you will provide all documentation related to loan valuation reports my office has requested by next week? Yes or no?
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Yes, we are complying with the numerous requests, and we are working with GAO, and we're going to continue to share information as we have it.
Will you provide all requested documents, data, and information with respect to the limited PSLF and IDR waivers, Operation Fresh Start, and the repayment pause by the end of next week? Yes or no?
We will comply with requests as they come in, knowing that it does take time to get information. There are numerous requests, and we want to be thorough and make sure we provide accurate information.
Mr. Secretary, before I yield back, I've heard the department has finalized plans for Operation Fresh Start, which is expected to be rolled out soon. If what I've heard is true, I'm deeply concerned. Your actions will have significant implications on every person who has or is seeking to purchase a home, a car, jumpstart a business, and access credit for things they otherwise would not be able to afford. This would not only be detrimental to everyday Americans looking to move up the economic ladder, but also has the potential to cause permanent damage to the entire U.S. economy. Mr. Secretary, have you or others at the department been made aware of concerns that this operation will have on American access to credit, such as mortgages, automobiles, and other consumer and business loan products? And again, I'm almost out of time. I need yes or no.
We're proud of the Fresh Start program, giving Americans another opportunity.
Yes or no? Yes or no, Mr. Speaker?
We are aware of the benefits that it provides for Americans who are struggling right now in default.
But have you
giving them
been
a fresh
told
start.
about the problems with the program? Problems with the program?
Yeah, we have had, I've had briefings shared about the
Is
program.
the department
proud of-
planning to announce or implement the program in the coming weeks or months?
Again, the Fresh Start program provides opportunity for those who are in default to start fresh again so that they can continue. I'll remind you that borrowers that are in default is worse for the economy. So giving them a fresh start is an opportunity for them to get the supports that they need so that they can pay their loans.
Yeah, but the average taxpayer is on the hook for what they don't pay back. And many of them don't have the same opportunities you're providing these people. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, even though I have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. Next we'll hear from the gentleman from the Secretary's home state, the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for my voice, Mr. Secretary. The pollen count in Connecticut is very high today. So first of all, I want to thank you for your opening remarks. You and I and Congresswoman Hayes live in a state that in 2012 lived through a horrible precedent with Sandy Hook. But I do think, you know, your call for action, there is, I think, an example what happened in 2013 in the wake, where we passed a comprehensive package of gun violence prevention, universal background checks, prospective ban on assault weapons, red flag statutes, and banning of bump stocks, and also de-weaponizing domestic violence situations. That was done on a bipartisan basis, and it showed that, you know, when people, you know, tried to absorb what happened there, they did say enough is enough, and it's time to roll up our sleeves and get serious. And hopefully, we'll see that happen in the wake of Uvalde. On page 2 of your testimony, Mr. Secretary, you pointed out that the timing of the budget created a little bit of a snafu in terms of some of the funding level requests. And I'd like to focus on 2 of those really quickly. One is on the career and technical education state grants, which again, you and I visited Grasso Tech in Groton last January and saw the welding program, but also some of the other great CT&E programs that were going on there. You're a graduate. The FY22 budget gave a very healthy increase to the state grants, and the budget that came over from the administration actually is below the enacted level from FY22. And the same is true of Impact Aid, which provides support for host military communities with children whose parents serve in the military service. And I was wondering, again, if you just clarify that the department actually will work with us to sort of recover from again, the issue that was caused by the delay.
Certainly, and you know, I share your passion for career technical education and what promise it provides. I remember visiting Groton with you and seeing that center where not only our high school students, but the adults that wanted to go in and learn a skill and have access to a higher paying job was made available to that. And so that and impact data, and I appreciate your advocacy for the important impact data that's there. What ended up happening and why the proposals were low is because we're thankful for the omnibus package and the funding there. But our FY23 proposal was due before the omnibus was done. So we sent in a proposal using 21 numbers, and the 22 package came out after our proposals came in. So we totally support the funding for that. In fact, we really believe a big part of the work moving forward at the Department of Education is to really engage in career-connected high schools and making sure that the through lines between our high schools, our two-year schools, and our workforce partners, our four-year schools, is tighter across the country. There's so much potential there. And I know you support that, as do we at the Department of Education. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak on that.
I appreciate it. Regarding PSLF, again, I would just remind my colleagues that that was a bipartisan bill that was passed in 2007. It is targeted. It's targeted to people who wear the uniform of our country: teachers, cops, firemen, firefighters, people in the nonprofit sector. The prior administration was granting less than, I think, 3% of PSFLF applications, and you have been untangling that wretched state of affairs. And I would just want to thank you, because your department joined my office for a webinar to sort of walk through the waiver program in terms of just how people can connect to it. It has gotten rave reviews. I encourage my colleagues to take advantage of your staff who do a great job of breaking it down in simple terms. And again, is that going to be part of your effort to, again, increase people's awareness of this opportunity?
Absolutely. When Congresswoman Fox said that the system was broken, it is broken. We came in and inherited a system for teachers, nurses, all these people we should be thanking during the pandemic. 98% of them were denied. We're really proud of the work we've done in 1 year to provide 127,000 borrowers loan relief. These are the teachers, the nurses, those who are public servants. So yes, we're going to continue to move forward on this. As you said, it was a bipartisan bill. It wasn't being implemented well, and we're fixing that, and we're proud of that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're proceeding by seniority. The next one in seniority on the minority side that I see on the screen is the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg.
Thank you, Chairman. And I thank Secretary for being here with us today. And I certainly would share the concerns, the horrific event that took place in Uvalde. It ought to be a wake-up call for us. And there are many things that we certainly can consider. But I hope we wouldn't neglect some of the other things. I'm reminded of that wonderful statement in the Northwest Ordinance that said, religion, morality, knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And so we want to encourage schools and the means of education, but religion and morality have to be there as well. And so when you see horrific things like this take place, it has to be all hands on deck in our homes, in our schools, in our churches, and we ought to be working together. And we did that for most of the history of this country. And we supplemented and instilled all sorts of those key values. And I hope we could coalesce again around those things and produce a stability in our society again, especially with our young kids, that marriage and family would be stable, that authority that comes from law enforcement would be stable in their lives, that we could work together in those areas. And I certainly want to be part of that solution in promoting things that are timeless and can move us forward, and not walking away from those just because it's the new trend in society to say your truth is what you ought to determine. We know that that won't work. There is truth, and we need to follow that. Having said that, let me move on with questions for this hour. And Secretary Cardona, I want to follow up on a topic Ranking Member Fox raised with you. Late last month, the markup reported that Department of Education used Facebook's Metapixel and analytical code to collect data from students and parents filling out the free application for Students Aid, FAFSA, and shared that data with Facebook. The data included names, phone numbers, email addresses, and zip codes. When initially asked about the tracking, the department denied it occurred only to later backtrack that statement, saying it was part of a, quote, advertising campaign. However, when asked for a briefing on the situation, the department told this committee and the Senate Health Committee that it would need to do more research before it could brief members. And so the question I have is that because of the lack of transparency to Congress and parents and students, which is alarming, Dr. Fox asked many questions regarding the depth of this data sharing, but I'd like to follow up on her questions and ask Mr. Secretary, do you believe parents and students have the right to protect their privacy when filling out the government forms?
Absolutely, Congressman.
Well, just this week, the Washington Post ran an article highlighting that remote learning has led to unfathomable amount of data on children being shared online. From the article, and I quote, millions of children have their online behaviors and personal information tracked by the apps and websites they use for school during the pandemic, end quote. The data on students was sent to other companies, ad companies, and surprise, Facebook. And all of this was done with vague disclosures, if any at all, in most cases. Mr. Secretary, do you share my alarm with the reporting on this issue?
Thank you, Congressman. I do. I'll be very frank with you. When I worked in the district, I was an assistant superintendent. One of the things that we did was ensure that as we're evolving our delivery of education, which includes online learning, that we were very careful and very open with parents. It's critical that parents know how information is being used.
So you agree?
When we learned that this Facebook.
Let me just make sure I understand. You agree then, Mr. Secretary, that we need to empower parents. We need to communicate with them in a transparent way, and regardless of who is asking for the information, they ought to be protected from undue access that can be used for purposes other than what they were intended.
Sir, before Secretary, I'm a father, and I absolutely agree that parents should have say, and they should have whatever information is being shared, they should know about it.
Well, I applaud that, and I certainly think that's where we can work together to tighten it down, to give security where it can be given, and work with parents first and foremost so that they know what's involved and know what's coming at their kids.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and I appreciate your response. I
Thank you,
yield
sir.
back.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I want to remind members that insofar as this is a full committee meeting and we have a lot of members, to try to keep an eye on the clock. So I thank the gentleman from Michigan for yielding back right at about 5 minutes. The gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablon, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Scott and Mr. Secretary. Good morning and welcome. I want to first thank you and President Biden for agreeing to my request to include $24 million for supplemental education grant for the Republic of the Marshall Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia. It is important that we, the United States, keep its commitments to the freely associated states. So thank you. The President's fiscal 23 budget calls for an increase in K-12 education investments, including a proposal to more than double Title I-A funds and significantly invest in mental health services and wraparound supports for students and families. So can you tell us about the importance of these investments, even after the significant investments Congress has made in K-12 education through the CARES Act, the CRRS Act of 2021, and the American Rescue Plan Act?
Thank you, Congressman Sablon. Yes. Prior to the pandemic, our country had tremendous disparities in access and in outcomes for students, depending on where you are in the country and what access you had to high quality education. And sadly, the pandemic made them worse. Title I, to me, is the best tool we have to level the playing field so that all children across the country have access, high quality education, qualified teachers, and pathways to higher education. So these programs that are funded through Title I ultimately result in reading teachers, in librarians, in additional tutoring, after-school programming, so that our students have the access, the opportunities that might have been missed during the pandemic. We believe that it is incumbent upon us to make sure that all children have a quality education, and Title I program does focus on making sure it's leveling the playing field.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And also a recent report from the GAO found that nearly 1 million students never showed up for class in 2020-21 school year. A variety of obstacles, reasons kept students from their education, including limited or no adult assistance at home, competing demands on their time, such as providing care to a family member during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is the reason why Democrats passed the largest single federal investment in K-12 education in U.S. history in the American Rescue Plan to help communities and school districts return to in-person learning and to help students with their educational, social, and emotional needs. So, Secretary Cardona, can you please share the department's plans for assisting schools in re-engaging disconnected students and making up for lost time in the classroom?
Thank you. Yes, I can. So there's short-term and there's long-term. Short-term, as you mentioned, the American Rescue Plan provided funds where districts can use the money to re-engage families. I've seen so many creative uses of the American Rescue Plan dollars. In Nevada, they created a team of parent liaisons that went out into the community to help families re-engage. In many cases, these students were also dealing with housing insecurity and food insecurity. So the American Rescue Plan dollars were helped re-engage those students into the school and provide support for those students. So that's some of the short-term strategies that I've seen, and states are using the American Rescue Plan dollars to re-engage students. Long-term solutions, we're asking in our proposal for full-service community schools. Those schools that did a better job re-engaging students were those schools that had a health center located there, that had access to food pantries for the students who were hungry, that had access to technology tools so students could be connected at home, and who had mental health support for students that were better developed than other schools. So the short-term solution is ensuring American Rescue Plan dollars are available for this. Long-term solutions is investing in full-service community schools, which we know help students stay engaged.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And another topic, but relative to K-12 education, is that I have a growing interest in learning why, for example, Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands have been placed on high risk for a decade or more, and trying to find out and understand why this program, why despite the effort that I know for, at least for Guam, they continue to be placed in this situation. But that's for another issue. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your time. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back time.
Thank you. Perfect, right at 5 minutes. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary. Thank you for being with us today, and I'm grateful for your service. And hey, my wife is a teacher, and so we have a great appreciation of the profession, and our sons have only done well because of teachers who really gave them the opportunities to learn math and science that they could not learn at home. So best wishes to our educators. With that in mind, during COVID-19, charter schools used their flexibility and autonomy to meet the specific needs of their community. And over the first year of the pandemic, South Carolina saw 7 new charter schools established as nationwide student enrollment grew. Mr. Secretary, what are you doing to highlight the importance of family choice of flexible education opportunities during this critical time?
Thank you for that, Congressman Wilson, and thank your wife for me for her service to the profession. So, you know, it's really important that parents have options. And what we've done is we're requesting the same funding and not cutting any funding for that. And we're highlighting schools that are successful, including public charter schools who have done a good job engaging students and finding innovative ways to help students achieve.
Hey, thank you very much. And I need to brag about my wife again. She taught at an alternative school. So, Mr. Secretary, these are giving young people a second chance who really in the old days would have not had. And so it was so exciting to see these young people give it one more chance. And many of them actually succeeded with extraordinary encouragement from educators. Mr. Secretary, I'm also grateful that I led a letter from 38 members of Congress to the Committee on Appropriations requesting strong support for the charter schools programs FY23. And I'm concerned that the federal charter schools program would receive level funding out of the Biden administration budget when overall spending on education programs would increase over 40%. In South Carolina, 42% of the state's charter school students are participating in free and reduced lunch program. What are your plans to increase the accessibility to charter schools for students and parents seeking this option?
Again, we're going to continue to support charter schools, and we know that they are eligible for grants. That while we didn't cut funding, we know that the proposed increases would benefit charter schools as well. And as I said before, we want to make sure that we're providing options for families, including high quality public charter schools, which, I can tell you from my experience in Connecticut, some of the schools that we highlighted when I was commissioner were charter schools, public charter schools that did exceptional work, getting high achievement for students. So I do recognize, similar to what you mentioned with your wife, the alternative schools, there are different ways to reach students, and it's important that we embrace all of them.
And finally, this may have already been asked, but with the COVID funding, nearly 25% of the $190 billion, only 25% has been used. Could this be used to address the security concerns that can be addressed to affect what occurred this week?
Thank you. Yeah, so we know the American Rescue Plan dollars were critical to get our schools safely reopened. The focus is providing mental health supports in our schools, increasing that due to the impacts of the pandemic. And obviously, as you mentioned earlier, the importance of science and math and making sure academically our students are caught up. Indirectly, crises like the one that we just experienced this week, if additional mental health supports are available, they can help the community. The funds are intended to help recover from the pandemic.
As the former president of Mental Health Association, I really appreciate your referencing this. And with that, I yield back. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fox. And thank you, Secretary Cardona, for being here today. I want to remind you of your commitment to come to Miami to visit our phenomenal school district. Thank you. Secretary Cardona, I spoke with an amazing young lady from Miami Gardens who shared with me that she continues to see her student loan balances grow, even when she's making monthly payments due to interest, capitalization, and negative amortization. After that, my staff met with more than 7 national organizations, including New America, who have written about this issue to discuss how we can fix our student loan repayment system for current and future borrowers dealing with this issue. In these discussions, we learned just how dire this issue has become in our country. Like the young lady from Miami Gardens and so many other Floridians, borrowers are experiencing extraordinary hardships because their monthly payments are not enough to cover accruing interest. As a result, their balances balloon even as they make regular payments. Can you talk about how together Congress and the Department of Education can address this issue? And how do you propose we deal with this?
Thank you for that. And I do remember the commitment to visit the 305 and see you there. I've heard stories in my visits of folks who are doing their best to pay. And as you mentioned, the interest rates just balloon. So they lose hope in that they're ever going to finish paying their loans. This is part of the problem that we're trying to fix at the root cause, and make sure that Americans are not afraid of going to college because of the costs. The system is broken, and this is an example of one of the ways it's broken. As you know, the department does not, cannot set interest rates, right? That is something that is set by Congress. But what we're doing is making sure that we have regulations that have fair treatment of interest, including capitalization, so borrowers don't see their balances go out of control. And we're also looking at the interest benefits of income-driven repayment. And I think this is a part that I want to focus a little bit on, because income-driven repayment, in layman's terms, says you don't pay more than you can afford. And I think many times people are afraid of going to college because they're getting these bills which are too high for them to consider buying a house, buying a car, or having families. So we need to control that. It's gotten out of control, and we're working really hard with the authorities that we have to make it more accessible to students, but also make it more affordable. We'd love to continue to work with you and others on Congress to see how we can fix that so our borrowers don't have this issue anymore.
So just to sum it up, as subcommittee chair of higher education and workforce innovation, I'm going to be looking forward to working with you and Chairman Scott to deliver on these much needed changes. We have to make changes. We cannot continue in this vein. Secretary Cardona, as you know all too well, the gun violence that's plaguing our schools and communities is just out of control. The citizens of this country have had enough of our thoughts and prayers. They deserve better. They deserve action. So we're here today for policy solutions and action. It's beyond time. It's beyond time that spineless Republican colleagues end their extramarital affair with the gun lobby and help us pass gun reform in this country. Instead, they offer senseless policies that don't address the gun violence epidemic our communities are facing. Just yesterday, they were calling for arming teachers and resource officers. Mr. Secretary, like you, as a former school principal and teacher, we know that's not the answer. What does the department need from Congress to ensure that when kids pick up their pencils and take out their books, it won't be their last time doing so?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'll tell you, I was a school principal during the Sandy Hook massacre, and the impact that had in our community, I can't put it into words. Educators go to school to work, to help children, socially, academically. We need to make sure that, number one, our professions are respected, and the solution of arming teachers, in my opinion, is further disrespect to a profession that's already beleaguered and not feeling the support of so many folks. We need to make sure we're empowering our teachers to be successful at teaching our children, and we need to work together. I think what Americans want to see is collaboration and bipartisan working together to do action. As you said, thoughts and prayers are not enough anymore. We need to stop that. We need to get to work. Americans are looking to us for answers, and we must deliver.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Thank you. I had some questions prepared, but I'm going to ask you one a little bit that wasn't in the original materials. The chairman started off by talking about disciplinary differences in schools, kind of implying there was a racial component. I always think that is an interesting statistic, but we're not going to change people's race. But I sometimes wonder, do you collect any statistics on the family structure background of kids? Those subject to discipline, those that aren't. I know so many wonderful children raised in all sorts of different backgrounds, but I wonder, are you making any effort to collect that information?
I know that the information that we collect from the Office for Civil Rights, the Civil Rights Data Collection, is something that we've done last year and we're doing this year to get more information on disproportionality. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head now if it has background information that's required of students to fill out on that. I would imagine that there's not.
Why don't you do that? Because maybe we'd learn something. Okay, why don't we request, there was a famous football player who recently toured a prison, obviously discipline on an entirely different level. But he talked about, way disproportionately kids in there without a father. And why don't you collect that information? And maybe we'll learn something that might not be that politically correct, but maybe we can do something to kind of get America back on the straight and narrow. Next question, and this is kind of along with my good buddy, Congressman Courtney. Why with all these big spending bills, haven't we put something in there saying that you can refinance government student loans, lower the interest rate that way? And there's several Democratic congressmen are out there pushing that. I push it. Is there any reason why that's not in any of your big proposals?
Happy to have my team reach out to you and get more information on that. I think what we're trying to do, Congressman, is really address some of the root causes of the issues. Poor oversight or misleading.
That's okay. Then we'll go on to the next one. I just got out of a budget committee, and we, of course, dealt with the huge inflation caused by excessive government spending. I see that your request here in the president's budget request for 2023 is a 20.9% increase over last year. I mean, given that inflation, housing prices, gas prices, which teachers pay too, seems to be completely out of control. And I think there should be almost unanimous agreement that it's primarily out of control because of excessive spending. Do you feel it was responsible for the president to, in his proposal, increase Department of Education funding by 20.9%?
First of all, the supply chain issues and the Russian war is contributing significantly. If anything, the proposals that our president put forward helped Americans with relief during a very difficult time. The reason for this request, sir, is because of decades of underinvestment in education. And it's, to me, a symptom that we're seeing teacher shortages and we're seeing challenges in education. So this budget aims to address the years of underinvestment, the decades of underinvestment. And I'm proud that the president is an education president.
Decades? You mean like the Obama and Clinton years? Decades. Well, okay. We'll give you another question. We have a problem that is becoming a budgetary problem, a problem in many other ways at our southern border. Your department has asked for an expansion of the Pell Grant program to include illegal immigrants. I always felt that was kind of bizarre because, of course, we're not including American citizens, and American middle-class kids continue to have to go deep in debt for their college education. But it has been the policy, apparently, of the Biden administration to push for free or almost free college for people who are here illegally. Do you still stand by that proposal? Or do you think it's something you might take off the table?
Congressman Grothman, I remember having a conversation with a teacher who was a dreamer, who was working twice as hard so that she can help the students in her classroom. And the Biden administration has been very clear that we do support ensuring dreamers have an opportunity for federal financial aid, including the Pell Grant.
Well,
these are students who are making a big difference in their communities. And
aren't kids born in America making a big difference in their communities?
Yes, they are.
Why do you insult them by offering these programs to illegal immigrants and not giving them to American citizens?
Sir, we are proposing an increase in Pell Grants for all students, and we hope you can support it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the few extra seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, gentleman yields back. And next we'll have the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. Thank you so much, Secretary Cardona, for your service, for being here today to discuss some of the most important issues facing our nation's students. I agree with your compelling words about the tragedy in Texas. We can and we must do more. Last year, we discussed the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Flexible Block Grant Program under Title IV-A of the Every Student Succeeds Act. We know these grants enable states and local school districts to support a variety of opportunities in well-rounded education, including the arts, music, civics, computer science, second language. Title IV-A also supports safe and healthy students, including mental health and violence prevention. and the effective use of technology. So based on our earlier conversations, I know we agree about the importance of Title IV-A and that more must be done to make these opportunities available to all students. So this year, I once again led a bipartisan appropriations letter asking for $2 billion for Title IV-A flexible block grants, which is significantly higher than the fiscal year 22 omnibus and the president's previous proposed funding level. So, Mr. Secretary, I'm concerned about the consequences of underfunding Title IV-A. So what has the administration done in the past year to make sure that all students are getting a well-rounded education? Shouldn't Congress provide funding for Title IV-A in line with the bipartisan letter beyond what was proposed in the fiscal year 23 budget? And if not, how would that affect students?
Yes, thank you for that. And again, this was an example of us putting a proposal in by the due date, but the budget from the previous year wasn't done. So we're thankful for the funds, and we agree. Again, as an educator, and I remember my visit to Oregon where we saw programs where students had summer enrichment with music. So the summer school was totally different. And that's why you had over 300 students on campus. So yes, I do believe Title IV, as an educator, I know the impact of it. I know that it helps engage students. We fully support the proposal to increase Title IV-A. And again, as an educator, I've seen the impacts of those programs like wraparound services for students that keep students engaged and keep them reaching at high levels.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And thank you for visiting Oregon. It was a great visit. And I just want to, again, emphasize as someone who worked a lot on the Every Student Succeeds Act, including on the conference committee, the importance of that well-rounded education piece and what a difference it makes for students. I hope that that we can meet in advance of the fiscal year 24 budget to discuss the importance of this funding. Secretary Cardona, I applaud the fact that payments, interest accrual, and collections on federally held student loans have been paused since March 2020 to support borrowers as they navigate the pandemic. And I've heard from many borrowers who are, let's say, very concerned about what happens at the end of the pause, which is why I introduced the Student Loan Borrower Safety Net Act. So when payments resume, my bill will help by providing earlier and more frequent outreach to borrowers, making it easier for borrowers to get into income-driven repayment plans and access economic hardship support, also provide back-end protections for those who end up missing payments after the pause ends. So the goal is to provide services and a support system to help especially the most vulnerable borrowers. We should not end the pause until we put these safeguards in place, along with a comprehensive plan to help new and future borrowers. So what steps is the department taking to help borrowers when payments restart? And how will you determine whether the servicers have the information they need to best support student loan borrowers?
Again, thank you for that. This is an example of something that we realize we have to do better. The Department of Education has to do better. So we're really proud of the work that's happening under FSA, the Federal Student Aid, to make sure that there are better on-ramps for borrowers to get back to repayment in a way that is manageable for them, where they can be successful and get back to repaying loans in a way that they're not being asked to pay more than they can afford. We're working on income-driven repayment changes to make sure that it's reasonable and it's manageable for our borrowers. We're also communicating early and often with our borrowers. We're proactively engaging with them, especially those that are at risk of delinquency, to give them options. It's very intimidating for our borrowers to have to think about going back into the system, but I can assure you the system that they're going to be going back to is not the same system that left, or the system where they didn't have answers or it was unclear. So we take this very seriously, and we too agree that when we do start the end the pause and start the repayment process, we have to have a more user-friendly process that's more clear to the borrowers, and working with our servicers to make sure that they have the information that they need and that they're taking care of our borrowers so that they can be successful repaying.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And as I yield back, I just want to note the importance of, yes, this is a short-term solution, but in the long term, we need to make higher education affordable and accessible for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the National School Boards Association recently released the results of the independent review into their letter to President Biden, calling for the DOJ to use counterterrorism tools to investigate parents as domestic terrorists. The report, in fact, confirms that the Biden White House colluded with NSBA on the letter, which DOJ immediately acted upon to mobilize the FBI to target parents at school board meetings. The investigation also revealed that the White House used information from NSBA regarding the planned letter to include in discussions with the Department of Justice before the letter was even finalized. In fact, a week before the letter was officially sent, the White House had a detailed summary of the contents of the letter and its request for federal intervention against parents, including usage of the Patriot Act. And Mr. Secretary, the report also reveals that senior officials at your agency, the Department of Education, had been in contact with NSBA regarding, quote, concerns about the increased public activism at school board meetings as early as last July. So I want to ask you questions about your awareness and involvement in the letter. In August of last year, you participated in virtual town hall meetings with NSBA representatives. During these events, did you request that NSBA write the letter or otherwise indicate support for the letter?
I think the same report you referenced showed that there was no evidence of that. And we've been saying since day one,
So is
Congresswoman,
that a
there
no?
is, correct,
Is that
that's no, and that's been the
So my
answer.
follow-up to that is,
But let me,
did you-
can I finish with my
No.
response, please?
this is my time. Did you suggest in any manner that the NSBA should solicit federal intervention and resources to deal in any way with local school board meetings?
Congresswoman, I feel strongly that parents' voice does matter, and especially during the pandemic when things weren't
But you're not answering a question,
difficult.
Terry.
I-
It's a question.
My
It's a
my
yes,
understanding
no.
of your question is that
Yeah.
you're doing exactly what I didn't want done. Let's not use this for division. We
It
talked to
doesn't-
over 8,400 parents.
Question about, all I'm saying is, did you suggest in any manner during those virtual town halls with NSBA that did you try to solicit any federal intervention or resources to deal with local school board meetings? It's your yes or no, and I have
No,
follow-ups.
there was no
Great. The report,
attempt to
the
do that.
report
What we wanted
stated,
to do,
Mr.
I would
Secretary,
love to finish my
report-
responses, Congresswoman.
you answered no.
I think
You
it's
answered no.
fair to give me an opportunity to respond if you're asking me a
Mr.
question.
Secretary, you answered no. The report in fact stated that, quote, some evidence also suggests that you, quote, requested additional information be sent to your office on disruptions at school board meetings during the August 16th town hall meeting. What did you mean about the additional information sent, and did you in fact receive this additional information?
Are you going to allow me to answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The NSBA, as well as other groups that are working with our families, including PTA parent groups, routinely communicate with the Department of Education as we're trying our best to be a service agency. Concerns were shared about some of the activities in some of the board meetings. And that's routine conversation that we have with different stakeholders when things are working well and what concerns that you have. That's typical practice here. As I said before, we didn't ask for any letters. We didn't ask for any information that you're alluding to. In fact, if you look at our track record, Congresswoman,
What
we've met
information
with over 8,400. We've met with over 8,400 parents. I've had parent groups, parent roundtables at many of my visits. And I know as an educator that parents are critical to the success of their children. They're the best partners in the process. That's why I'm fighting for full service community schools that engage parents. That's why I expected American Rescue Plan proposals have parent
Mr.
engagement
Secretary,
in it. So look at our track
Mr.
record. and
Secretary,
show
I know
support
I've
for that as well.
I know I've hit a nerve here, so I'm going to continue asking questions. So the answer is yes, there was additional information as part of those conversations. My follow-up is, were you or any Department of Education personnel sent a copy or otherwise made aware of a summary of the letter provided to the White House on September 21st? That's a pretty easy yes or no
I
question.
don't have any information. I don't recall getting any letter, summary letter.
So were you made aware of the September 22nd discussion between the White House and DOJ pertaining to the letter, or, quote, options we can pursue here? Were you or any personnel at the Department of Education?
Not that I'm aware of at this point. I don't have any information on that.
So were you first and your staff first made aware of the letter on September 29th? Is that what you're testifying to today?
I can have my staff get back to you on what information we received if you'd like. If it's that important to you, let's focus on what's in the budget to help our families.
It is
instead of
important.
trying to
It's
create
important to
division.
parents across the country. In fact, we do have an outstanding Freedom of Information Act request, which was sent to the department requesting all information, documents, or communications. If there's no problem providing this to Congress, why has the department not complied with this request? Do you intend to apply with the FOIA request? And what's the timeline for that?
We always do, and we want to continue to connect with families as we've done in the past. Thank you.
And what's the timeline for that FOIA, complying with that FOIA?
I'll have my staff reach out to you to give you that information. Thank you.
I see them handing you papers. I can see it on the screen. My final question is, President Biden's DOJ has in fact not rescinded the memo directing the FBI to use counterterrorism tools.
The gentlelady's time has expired as well as you're well over.
Thank you.
Okay. Gentlelady's time has expired. The next on our side is Chicano Adams DeSagne.
Yes,
Gentleman
Mr. Chairman, I'm
Gentleman
here.
from California, Mr. DeSagne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your introductory actions and comments. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your passion and your honesty today. I had I had one area of conversation in your budget and prospectively, but I'm going to add a second one. So I'll ask these two questions at the same time because they're interrelated, but we also have to distinguish the differences. First, on mental health, you and I have had this conversation multiple times now, I think. We passed a bill out authored by myself and the chairman just a week ago, and a series of bills, a wonderful bill by Representative Wild, Representative Hayes has had a bill prior. But on mental health, our bill, Mental Health Matters Act, the spirit of it is to invest, and question on your budget, in the whole array of how do we get more services for kids and teachers, in particular, from Head Start to higher education, a pipeline so we get more people into the field. We know from the ACA and parity that there's been a very large increase in the request for mental health services. I very much appreciate the hearings we've had and the sentiment by all of my colleagues, including the ranking members, about stigma. So what can we do and what are we doing in the budget, and what could we do more in the budget for mental health, and how we coordinate with other initiatives in other departments? HSS just announced a week ago a grant for the study and coordination of social media and its effect on kids. So that's the first question. The second is more related to what's just happened. And I'm reminded of the Steinbeck quote that a sad soul has killed more people than any germ. And this hopelessness over what's happening in this country, in schools in particular, that you addressed, and we do have to distinguish these. The United States is now not an outlier when it comes to mental health, but we are when it comes to gun violence. You're 25 times more likely to be a victim of gun violence in the United States. The US has 4.4% of the world population, but we have 42.5% of the guns in the world. So separating those two, first, what you're doing in the budget to do more for mental health for teachers and students, and a career pipeline for people to go into the field of mental health so we can get these services up. And second, can you do more about school safety and specifically gun violence? Do you have more authority without the Congress? And at the same time that you look at that and push it in the urgency you expressed in your initial opening comments about this, can you look at everything you can do to coordinate for the very best evidence-based research that we've had success with the minority when it comes to criminal justice reform? Give us the facts, give the states the facts. We know in Connecticut, California, what happened yesterday is less likely. It still can happen, but it's less likely statistically because of the legislative actions they've done. So if you could answer those two questions, can you do more while you work with us to do more statutorily and in a conversation with the minority where we can have success?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for your advocacy. You know, I do believe the mental health needs in our schools have been greater even before the pandemic. And in my conversations with students, as recently as a couple of weeks ago when I was in Nevada, New Mexico, excuse me, there were students who said that if it weren't for the supports that were put in place post-pandemic with ARP money, one student said, those supports saved my life. We are at a crisis right now. So I do appreciate the Surgeon General lifting it to the level of crisis. This budget proposes funds to make mental health supports not just a little bit more, but pervasively change the system to make sure it's the foundation under which professional development is provided for our educators, making sure that more programs are available for our families and our students. We're supporting community-based programs in our schools so that students have seamless access. We know students are 6 times more likely to access mental health supports in our schools than they are in the community. So that's why we're promoting full service community schools and mental health supports in our schools. Thank you for the 90 million in the omnibus, but we're proposing more because we need more mental health support work in our schools. So yes, foundationally, our schools have to be transformative in their changes to make sure mental health access is there for all students. Going to the second question, we're working very closely with HHS on an intergovernmental approach to work more closely to make sure that these systems are pervasive in our country and not just pockets of excellence. And we look forward to working with our Republican colleagues to just move the politics. Let's talk about what our kids need and give us the opportunity to share from the perspective of educators what the needs are in our schools. And I hope we can make some progress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's up. I'll yield back, but I look forward to further conversation about what you can do more on school safety.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Obviously, difficult day for America and our great country. And, obviously, we've got some local issues that you may or may not be aware of, but I wanted to make you aware of them. In our largest city, which is also, they've so demonized and defunded the police in Atlanta, Georgia, that it's unsafe. In fact, they're trying to separate parts of the city so that other folks get protection. It's just a mess. But I'd like to make you aware of politically motivated lesson plans taught in one of Georgia's largest public school districts. The Atlanta Public Schools is opposing Georgia's new election law and voter identification. Because I am concerned that our students in Atlanta Public Schools are receiving one-sided information on this bill to advance a candidate for office and their political aims. I want you to know that I wrote a letter to the Georgia Department of Education about this concern. In fact, this week, Georgia had their primary election under Georgia's new election law, and early voting increased 212% above compared to 2020. So I think we need to move away from injecting bias and political indoctrination in the classroom and teach comprehensive facts on issues. Are you aware of this, Mr. Secretary?
So specific to the issue in Georgia, I can't comment. Curricular decisions are made at the local level. And what I can tell you, however, is the way our system is set up is states and local municipalities are the ones who pass curriculum. And it would be important for communication to those bodies take place. What I will tell you is that curriculum should be the truth, And it should cover, what makes this country so great, but include the parts that we're not so proud of as well.
Yeah.
But again,
Mr. Chairman,
we don't work with curriculum here at the department. That would be my opinion based on myself as an educator.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's a big debate on what is the truth. And I would like to, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this letter for the record, please.
Without objection.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, in your testimony, you stated that you're committed to reversing funding inequities. There's nothing more inequitable than a wealthy parent being able to send their child to any school they want. But outdated education policy is telling low-income parents they can't have the same opportunities. We don't want to lose one child in this country. The idea of school choice is not public versus private schools, but the opportunity for parents to choose the best school for their child, regardless of their zip code, whether that be a traditional public, private, charter, or faith-based school. Last year, I asked you if you would support the idea of school choice, and you could not give me a direct answer. So I ask you, Mr. Secretary, will you embrace the idea of school choice to allow every student to flourish in the learning environment they are best suited for?
Yes, I do support choice.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Secretary, another issue I would like to discuss is the lack of transparency being taught in the classroom, specifically lessons stemming critical race theory. I'm proud that the Georgia State Board of Education adopted a resolution affirming they will work to prevent promotion of divisive ideologies. Parents want an education system that will allow their students to gain skills needed to obtain good paying jobs and that will allow them to be successful. I hope you will be committed to addressing these issues and to supporting school choice in the department's budget.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and next we'll hear from the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, welcome. Unfortunately, very difficult circumstances in the last 48 hours, just incredible on so many levels. And the idea of taking your kids to school and dropping them off, no parent should ever have to wonder whether those kids will be alive when they pick up. So I appreciate the comments by the chairman and by you earlier on. But I want to make a small deviation on safety in terms of guns and certainly violence, and change a little bit to a letter that we have sent to the appropriators and certainly to your office, talking about the Office of School Infrastructure and Sustainability. And I understand that is going to be included in the budget, but I'd like to get a little bit of feedback from you on why, given the experiences we just went through, particularly with COVID and the direct connection with spreading of viruses, in this case, COVID, but in general, and what we can do to upgrade our schools, but have that central clearinghouse. Hospitals obviously know about this, particularly given the nature of what they're dealing in. Schools don't always look at it that way because it's not health and safety all the time the way hospitals are. Can you talk a little bit about bringing the experiences from around the country and certainly from the experts that we're dealing with in Washington?
Certainly, Congressman Norcross, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. You know, absolutely, I think we have the responsibility at the Department of Education to lift up best practices across the country and to support and be a service agency where we see that there's a great need. I can tell you from experience that, you know, when I was serving as a principal of an elementary school during a massacre that took place about 35, 40 minutes away from where the school I worked in was, we overhauled our protocols, our sign-in procedures, our background checks. We had devices in our office. We had a single point of entry. We had, as I mentioned in the beginning, windows were numbered, and we had ongoing professional development and training for this. So there were some things that we did. And then as things changed, protocols changed, our connections with the police department. So these are all valuable tools that we believe when we're talking about not only responding or preparing for these, but when we're building schools, we need to be aware of what things we should be taking into account to ensure student safety and staff safety.
Almost 10 years ago, when I was serving the New Jersey Senate, there were a series of shootings, mass shootings that all brought it home. And there were those that want to turn our schools into literally encampments that were locked down, that you couldn't go outside. So there's a definite fine line in keeping our children safe, but making sure they're not in a prison, that they still enjoy going to school. And this is where those best practices are going to have to come into play. Not one size fits all when it comes to the infrastructure. But we are a free and great nation, but we can't get locked down. If you could just talk about that sort of dichotomy.
We had to thread the needle, right? Because we want our schools to be happy places where kids are being kids. They're jumping, they're laughing, they're playing recess without fear of, you know, having to worry about being fenced in or blocked in or having recess indoors. So we had to thread that balance, and we wanted to make sure that our school concerts had grandparents there and family members celebrating the achievements of the children. Schools are happy places, they're communities. We have to have a balance. And with that said, it's really important for us to broaden the conversation, right? We have to be sensible about legislation that could protect public places, because it's not only schools. It's a week and a half ago, it was a grocery store. It was a church. So we need to be sensible and realize that it's not one solution that's going to take care of all of that. We are a part of it. And we always have to be vigilant and balance that. But it's not just that. We have to be thinking globally about things that over 80% of Americans agree on, certain policies that are being not discussed. When I can't find too many things that 80% of Americans agree on today, yet there's some very sensible legislation that can be passed that we need folks to act on now.
Thank you, and I yield back balance my time, Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. However, your department is currently pushing a rule to force every school in America to add non-binary as a sex characteristic. How can the Department of Education enforce sex-based discrimination when the very definition of sex is so unclear?
Thank you, Congressman. We're not pushing for that. We are allowing states who have different categories to use those different categories of data collection that they're already collecting.
So you're not pushing for a rule to add non-binary?
We're allowing states to report whatever classifications they have in their states, yes.
Interesting. So, Mr. Secretary, do you believe that biological male athletes competing in women's sports are in conflict with Title IX protections for female athletes?
Sir, I understand where your line of questioning is going. I would love to talk to you about how the budget is going to help the students in your community. I'm proud of the Title IX regulations.
It's a simple question, Mr. Secretary, simple question.
Right.
Is it fair for biological boys to compete against girls in sports?
I believe all children should have an opportunity to engage in extracurricular activities, including athletics, including the arts, because that's what our schools provide, and every student should have access to it.
Mr. Secretary, never before have we had an administration like this one that's decimated Title IX like you guys are. Do you believe it's fair or not for biological boys to compete against girls in sports? It's a simple question.
I believe all students should have access to sport. And
so you do support biological boys competing against girls in sports?
I believe I answered the question.
No, you haven't. Just, it's a simple question. Just answer the question. The administration either supports it or you don't.
You're saying, do I believe transgender girls should have access to sports? Yes, I do.
So you and this administration support biological boys competing against girls in sports. And you don't, and furthermore, you don't believe that that's in direct conflict with Title IX.
Sir, I see where your questions are going, and I'm going to be very clear with you. Our transgender students need to feel supported, included, and seen. And your line of questioning is even by describing it the way you're doing it, shows me that you don't believe that all students should have access to the extracurricular activities that schools provide.
Well, I guess where I'm going, Mr. Secretary, is you can defend, you believe that Title IX protects biological boys competing against girls in sports. Does this administration stand by that? We're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary next month of Title IX, which was brought about with bipartisan support 50 years ago. And somehow, somewhere, you and this administration believe that Title IX somehow protects biological boys from competing against girls in sports. You're okay with that?
I've had conversations with girls who are transgender, who also look to sports to develop their own sense of accomplishment, to set goals, to work as a part of a team. I do support their ability to access what the public schools provide, both at the K-12 level and at the higher ed level.
All right, Mr. Secretary, do you agree that school districts do you believe that school districts should keep a child's involvement in gender transition a secret from their parents?
Sir, I would love to answer questions on the budget, which is why I'm here. And I think what I'm gathering.
Mr. Secretary, these are policies that your administration stands behind. You're asking me to fund your budget. and these are policies that you stand for. It's completely irrelevant to why you're here today. It's a simple question. Answer the question. Do you think the schools should keep it a secret from their parents if their children are involved in gender transition?
Parents and schools must work together to support students. And I do strongly support. And if you look through the work that we've supported and our policies and our practices, we want parents.
Should schools ever keep that a secret from parents?
Excuse me?
Should schools ever keep it a secret from parents if their children are involved in gender transition?
Schools should always
be a secret from parents.
Schools should be partnering with parents in communication. And there are times where schools are working and supporting students on issues that are very sensitive. But I do believe that parents should be connected with schools. And in many cases, working together is what's going to help the student. I have spoken to students who've shared whatever situation is at the home, that they felt safe at the school. And we have to be careful not to try to turn this into something that it's not. Our schools are safe places for our students, and our teachers are often the frontliners when it comes to supporting students when they have issues in their lives.
That's a very bizarre answer. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you. Let's see. Gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal, Mr. Morelli, Ms. Wild. Gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Macbeth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Secretary Cardona, for being with us today. Now, I was really prepared today to ask you about the Department of Education's expansion of Pell Grants. I really wanted to kind of bring those questions to light, but with the recent massacre at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, a story this nation has had to tell over and over and over again. It's just difficult to discuss college grants for our children when we can't even be sure if they're going to survive elementary school. On Tuesday afternoon, our nation learned once again that we, the adults in this country, allowed our children to be slaughtered because some of our colleagues in the United States Capitol, some of our colleagues on this committee were too afraid to stand up to the NRA and prevent this from happening. We lost 19 young children on Tuesday, 19 young babies, children with goals, children with hope, children with futures. But we didn't lose them. We allowed them to be taken by those who should not be able to access guns. As I've told this committee before, and as I have told the American people before, I sadly know these parents in Uvalde. I know how they feel. And I know the horrifying, heartbreaking, soul-crushing feeling of losing your baby, realizing that they will never walk through your front door again, that you won't see them walk across their graduation stage, that you won't have that first dance with them, that you will never be able to hug your child again. It is a pain that never goes away. And while it takes away your baby, your children, it leaves you with this fiery and everlasting resolve to ensure that this happens to no other mother, to no other family, to no other community. And that's why I am so thankful today that my federal red flag bill will finally be on the House floor when we return in June. Red flag laws have been enacted in 19 other states and the District of Columbia. They empower our families, household members, and law enforcement to ensure that those who pose a threat to their community or themselves do not have access to firearms. My bill will allow these close contacts to petition a federal district court to have guns taken out of the wrong hands. Once a federal district court has issued an ERPO order, law enforcement will be empowered to take these firearms and ammunition out of the hands of dangerous people or people that are a threat to themselves. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to finally stand up for the children in their districts as well, for the children in America, and support a federal red flag law. My bill, HR 2377, we have the power to stop this. I've been listening over and over again as everybody talks about prayers and thoughts and how sorry they are for the families, but yet we refuse to act. So there are no excuses anymore to any of my colleagues. No excuses. Not a one of us, not any one of us has constituents in our communities that are immune to this kind of violence. It is happening everywhere. We have the power to protect our babies. We cannot continue to wait any longer. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Lady yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer. Gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I should have interjected earlier, but I'm going to use the first few seconds of my time to communicate that I do take personal offense to what Congresswoman Wilson stated earlier. I took that as insulting about being spineless and having some kind of a illicit affair with some lobby. And so I just want the record to show that. And I'll proceed with my questions.
All members are advised to leave out questions of motive or character of other members. So the gentleman from Idaho's point is well taken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today, and appreciate your comments and testimony. In regard to that, you had previously discussed in your written testimony the need to strengthen the budget to address what you refer to as daunting barriers of students, especially students in low-income communities that face obtaining a high-quality education. Your budget request seeks to remove those barriers, and yet my colleague, which is Representative Jacobs, put forward a letter that I and many of us signed on the committee signed that seeks to prevent additional barriers the department is putting in the way of charter schools to get started and operate. So this is the notice of priorities, requirements, definitions, and selection criteria, NPP, for charter schools and charter school program. These schools help the poor and the rural students, especially in my state. Would you please speak to that? How do you reconcile the apparent conflict here?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And I do agree that quality education comes in different forms. Quality public charter schools are an option. As I said before, I've seen great examples of public charter schools meet needs of students and provide innovation. What we're doing here through the regulatory process is proposing what we believe are reasonable proposals that increase greater accountability, transparency, and fiscal responsibility, responsiveness to community, and collaboration. Now, a lot of the information in these proposals, they're not set yet, have been twisted a bit to make it seem like we're requiring it. And that's absolutely not the case. These are proposals, and we've done a lot of listening, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback, which is the way the process should work.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Just a statement here. I want to make sure to communicate something. The charter schools consistently enroll about 10% of Idaho's students, and they have achieved largely positive results, both academically in terms of parental involvement, especially the brick and mortar ones, and they and our traditional public schools enjoy a large positive relationship within the school districts. And according to a Stanford study in 2019, the average Idaho charter school outperforms traditional public schools, and they also do well on average with the ISAT, the Idaho Standards Achievement Test. And so they excel. And the administration appears to have some heartburn with the charter school situation. And I just want to go on record to tell you that, look, it's working in our state. And if you'd like to make a comment on that, great. But I do have another question I'd like to get to here as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to proceed. Mr. Secretary, regarding loan forgiveness, under the borrower defense to repayment, FSA's website states the summary reports on the number of claims filed, approved, and et cetera, are supposed to be published on a monthly basis. Are you aware there's not been any report published since December of 2021?
I will look into that, sir, and have my staff reach out to yours about the reporting frequency.
Please do. It would just be helpful that to understand the volume of the borrower defense claims before the new proposed regulation is issued. And it's my understanding that there's a proposed rule updating the BDR discharge process to be released in the coming weeks. Is that your understanding? Is that correct?
Again, I can have our team reach out to you regarding borrower defense. We know that over $2 billion in borrower defense was provided to 132,000 borrowers to date.
We just need that information, Mr. Secretary. It's important as part of the process. I also think better understanding of the volume of claims is important, given that I've made aware of some concerning practices by advocacy groups that appear to have the precedence here with respect to debt cancellation. Mr. Secretary, are you aware of a group called the Debt Collective?
No, I'm not in communication or aware of it.
I'm just about out of time here, but it's a left-wing organization. The mission is to demand and achieve full debt cancellation for all. Just want to bring that to your attention. That's what we're up against. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Next is the gentlelady from the Secretary's home state, the gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. He's actually my constituent. My questions, I had different questions for today, but as you can imagine, in light of everything that has happened, I want to shift my line of questioning because, like you, I was in the classroom when Sandy Hook happened. And like you, I have children who are being educated in this state then and now. In 2020, 3 million teenagers reported having serious thoughts of suicide. Nearly 4 in 10 people in the US are now reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression. Prior to COVID, it was 1 in 10. 1 in 5 young people report that the pandemic had a significant impact on their mental health, and 80% of youth in need of mental health services do not have access in their community. Finally, in 2019, no state met the student to social worker ratio for 1 social worker to every 250 students as recommended by the National Association of Social Workers. There's a lot of conversations being had about where we go from here. Last week in this committee, we marked up the Mental Health Matters Act, which included my bill, the Supporting Trauma-Informed Education Practices. My question to you, Mr. Secretary, is what are the plans of the department to address the mental health needs of not only our students, but of our educators who are not prepared and should not be expected to deal with this type of trauma, and also to better prepare them to identify red flags and changes in behavior and have the resources and the support when they try to report those things?
Thank you, Congresswoman Hayes. And I appreciate the work that you're doing to really lift up the importance of trauma-informed schooling and providing real professional learning opportunities for teachers to really develop those skill sets, to look for those flags, as you call them, to make sure that students are getting the help that they need. We appreciate in the omnibus the $90 million for mental health supports. And in this budget proposal, we are proposing not only funding for additional school social workers and psychologists. I'm very proud to say that the American Rescue Plan dollars have increased the number of school psychologists and social workers. So thank you for the support of that. But we're also looking at full service community schools, because we know in our schools where mental health supports are also community-based, it's more likely that our students get access to it. We really want to, and as a educator in Waterbury, you knew it's really important that children have access to mental health supports as a foundation of their learning, and that it's destigmatized so that there's various pathways to mental health supports. I appreciate the statistics that you shared, and for us at the Department of Education, we're really looking at mental health access as a pillar of how we reimagine schools. And we've asked the American Rescue Plan funds to be used for that, and we're expecting with our budget that it can also promote better strategies across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll also add, not only for the professionals who are trained in those areas, but many of our classroom teachers who never had any of this high-level training are the first ones who have to deal with these type of traumatic events. There's a lot of conversation about where we go next. And I was discouraged by the fact that many of my colleagues on this committee voted against supporting trauma-informed education practices, voted against many of the mental health bills that we brought forth to this committee. And as we go forward, that has to be a part of any comprehensive strategy that we have. My other question was actually about Title IX, and I appreciate the answers that you gave and your commitment to supporting all of our students, because I don't know how you single students out until there's a critical mass. I know that there will be coming up, there's going to be a reevaluation of the way of Section 504 with regulations regarding students with disabilities. Can you tell us how you plan to engage all families as part of the decision-making process in that area?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And I certainly agree, before I get into that, the importance of classroom teachers and making sure our teacher preparation programs understand trauma-informed instruction is critical. Those connections are critical. Yes, we have an opportunity here to listen, to engage families of different backgrounds, people who have had good experiences with the 504 process and people who feel that that didn't work for them. And as an educator myself, I've seen examples where it seems like the program, the implementation of it doesn't work the way it's intended. So our agency is aiming to have a very wide net of stakeholder engagement to make sure that whatever we put forward has the input of those families and students that we serve.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, because the answers will be different than they were 50 years ago. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Cardona, a new rule for gainful employment was discussed in the department's most recent negotiated rulemaking session. A number of negotiators suggested that the department go back to the 2014 gainful employment regulations as a base to jumpstart negotiations. However, the department did not do this. Instead, the department limited negotiators to 2 sessions to view and discuss their gainful employment. The proposal made several changes, including the removal of any ability for an institution to appeal the data before becoming ineligible for Title IV programs, and proposed to give the secretary authority to remove an entire institution's ability for Title IV because of small program rates, debt to earnings rates, and the earnings threshold measure, among other items. So, Mr. Secretary, what is the rationale for these changes?
Thank you for the question. We feel strongly that we have a responsibility to improve, and I see you don't disagree with that, to improve gainful employment and to make sure that students who are going to higher education institutions have a good return on investment and are able to be employed. The processes that we're using does take into account input, and I'd be happy to follow up with your team if you want to hear more information about why it was done in the way it was done.
Okay. And just real quickly, why was the department unwilling to allow for institutions to appeal any of the data?
Again, sir, I'd be happy to have a more detailed follow-up with the folks from our higher ed team, with your team, to share more information about how the decisions were made to move forward with our gainful employment processes.
Okay, and I'll move along here. On June 24th of 2021, when discussing higher education policy, you stated before the committee your intent to hold all higher educational institutions accountable for misleading students, not just the ones the department does not support. Yet the department is leading an Office of Enforcement to increase oversight over proprietary institutions, while nonprofit institutions don't face similar scrutiny. The FTC in particular has threatened to take action against the largest proprietary institutions by their own admission, using the Department of Education's published data on revenue and enrollment size of these institutions, despite having zero reason to believe there has been any wrongdoing at these specific institutions. So, Mr. Secretary, can you please explain how the department plans to keep its focus on providing value for the student rather than scrutinizing institutions based upon their tax-paying status?
Thank you, Congressman Keller, and I again appreciate your engagement on the topic. You know, we're setting out to improve services and to ensure students are not taken advantage of. We recognize that There are some institutions that are more likely to do this. So we do have our FSA enforcement unit, but we do believe that all schools should be held to a high account when it comes to providing a return on investment. And this is work that we're going to continue to do because the system is not working now. And I welcome your input. I welcome your thoughts on this and how we can do better. But the goal for us is really to make sure that we're enforcing good practices so that our students are not left in major debt and inability to pay.
Well, that should be a goal of all of ours, that people get a quality education, regardless of the institution's filing status. We can all agree on that, right?
Yes.
The filing status of an institution, whether it's proprietary, not-for-profit, public, doesn't matter. If they're providing a good education, we need to support them. If they're not, we need to make sure we hold them accountable. So I want to keep the focus squarely on the student, and I think we all want to do that, and make sure that they have the tools to succeed. But and again, I think we can agree on that. We did it in our last meeting, and I guess I would just want a commitment. I know last time we talked, we agreed on making sure everybody's held accountable in the same method. Have you come up with any plans since our last discussion on how we're going to do that?
Well, yes, the strategies that are coming out of higher ed with the scorecard, with our conversations, we're meeting with these folks regularly, private, public institutions, and the message is the same. I mean,
okay, well, I guess I would just say this. If that's the case and we care about the student, then I think you should get a hold of the FTC and make sure that they're not targeting proprietary institutions and using your information to do that. And I guess I would just let's make sure that we have the agreement that nobody should be using the Department of Education's information to target any institution simply because of their status.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman yields back.
Yes.
Next is the gentleman from Michigan. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Cardona. It's so great to have you here. I've been honored to have your leadership on many initiatives I work on, including the Jobs Act and expanding Pell Grants, WIOA, and of course, America's College Promise Act. And I was so delighted to welcome you to both Oakland and Macomb community colleges in Michigan last year. You know, we've had deep and meaningful conversations about how to protect and strengthen our public education system from pre-K to post-secondary. And I want to take a moment to focus on one aspect of that all here right now, and that is the student debt crisis in this country. You know about it so well. I can't commend you enough for the $17 billion in forgiveness that your department and the president have provided for students defrauded by institutions, and for your strong start in fixing the broken public loan forgiveness program. So that's all great, and yet we must do more. Millions of Americans have been prevented from fully participating in our economy by buying a house or changing careers or starting a business or even starting a family because they're saddled with this student loan debt. And the student debt crisis is a racial, gender, and economic justice issue that impacts people of color and women disproportionately. Black borrowers on average owe $25,000 more than white borrowers, and 58% of all student loan debt is held by women. The student debt crisis is also fueling other crises in our public education system, including the educational staff shortage that threatens to leave us without enough teachers and other school personnel to teach and take care of our kids in the classroom. Young people aren't pursuing careers in education in part because they can't afford to pay off their debts, and educators with debt are leaving the profession altogether for the same reason. We have an opportunity here to provide immediate relief. Research shows the bolder the cancellation, the better the outcome. Canceling $50,000 of student loan debt will make 76% of current borrowers debt-free, transforming lives and delivering the biggest racial justice impact. And poll after poll has indicated that Americans want student debt relief. So it's now really a question of when this will happen. So Secretary, can you give us an update on when the president might announce, do you feel like this is going to happen, and when might the president announce an effort to relieve, the people up, as you know, into their 60s and 70s even of this burden?
Thank you, Congressman, for the work you're doing around supporting our students, and I enjoyed the visit with you to see it on the ground. With regard to the broad-based student loan forgiveness, the conversations are ongoing with the White House and Department of Education, and we heard the president speak several weeks ago, and while I have nothing to share on that, you do know the conversations are going. I will tell you that we're not waiting for that to act for our borrowers who've been defrauded. We're proud of the work in 1 year to relieve over $19 billion now in loans for over 770,000 borrowers. And this includes folks who are total and permanently disabled. There's $8.6 billion in relief there. And many of them are veterans. The public service loan forgiveness, you brought it up. Like in 1 year, we're fixing that program. It went from 98% denial rate. Now we have 127,000 people who have benefited from it. Teachers. So you don't have to wait for the announcement. There are teachers who are eligible for loan forgiveness today. Studentaid.gov, check it out. Police officers, firemen, professors who are working in public service have eligibility now. So we're going to continue to do that. We're going to address the loans, outstanding loans for schools that have closed, or schools that took advantage of students and sold them something and never delivered. So we're proud of that record. We're going to continue doing that. And I appreciate your advocacy for that.
Yeah, well, thanks. Your work there has just been so fantastic. Turning to the budget for FY 2023, I don't have a lot of time left, but I'd love for you to talk about steps you're taking to, of course, bring down the cost of higher ed, because we can't just fix the problem from the past. We have to fix it going forward. You've been such a staunch champion of my America's College Promise Act. I'd love to hear you shout out again that you and the president and the first lady are still, we're going to get that done at some point, but speak about the budget and how you're going to lower the cost of higher ed.
So we want to stop the bleeding. We don't want to be in the same position 5 years from now. We've increased the FSA enforcement, the college scorecard. We've been meeting with institutions of higher ed, and we're going to push for a return on investment. That's what the American people need.
Outstanding. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from the gentlelady from Iowa, Dr. Miller Meeks.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and also Ranking Member Fox, and thank you to Secretary Cardona for appearing here today. And I just want to say, although Secretary Cardona, you were not in place at the time that ARA was passed, I had two amendments at the time of that 14-hour markup that would allocate or appropriate $2 billion for mental health funding through K through 12 and $2 billion for mental health funding for higher education. That was voted against by every single Democrat on this committee. So I do appreciate my colleague bringing up mental health issues, but also want to remind that there were amendments that were passed to funding that has gone out the door, and yet there is still funding that has been unspent out of the ERA fundings that were appropriated to schools. We also recently heard about the student loan forgiveness. And with all the discussion about student debt forgiveness, I think it's important that we identify who in fact holds all the debt. And I will say that I'm a physician who left home at 16, starting at community college, worked myself through college, through a master's in education, and then to medical school, and was one of those individuals who did have student loan debt at 13 to 18% interest rates. But according to Federal Reserve data, nearly 60% of outstanding student loan debt is held by borrowers with graduate degrees. During negotiated rulemaking sessions, your staff repeatedly noted that including graduate students and the new income-driven repayment plan would provide benefits beyond the limited scope to which these repayment plans were designed, that is, targeting benefits to low-income borrowers. I would agree with that. And can you confirm that the department will stick by its initial proposal and exclude graduate students from new income-driven repayment plans?
So we're having conversations about that, but I want to use this moment to share that teachers, for example, have graduate degrees and are woefully undercompensated compared to peers that have similar education levels. So not all folks with graduate degrees are in a position where they wouldn't benefit from income-driven repayment.
It doesn't sound like you've given me no, confirmation that you would limit those that are not within low-income borrowers. So that's not very reassuring. Furthermore, student loan forgiveness has also the effect that there is no requirement for schools to address spiraling or skyrocketing costs. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Representative Fulcher, who bringing up charter schools in our state in Iowa. We have robust educational opportunities, and our governor has made that a point. And given the increase in achievement, especially in our minority populations, I think that all of us would agree that the most important thing we do is to educate, regardless of what institution. And with that, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Representative Fox.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. Mr. Secretary, to stick with this issue about loans, on Operation Fresh Start, do you plan on announcing the details of the plan within the next week? And if not, when?
I don't have the information from the higher ed office when they plan on announcing, but I can have my team reach out to you within the next week to share when it's going to be sent.
Well, when we were talking about the issue earlier, your comments made me think we were talking part one, past one another. Can you provide us with the details of what Ed is planning to do? Whether you can tell us when it's going to do it, but what are you planning to do?
Sure. We recently announced, Ranking Member, the Fresh Start program to allow borrowers who are either in default or delinquent in their payments to have the benefit of a fresh start so that they can get back on and it wouldn't harm their credit score and their ability to move on financially. So we have announced that. I'm not sure if that's what you're referencing.
Yes, and as I brought up to you earlier, that is going to cause a major problem with credit, the people who put together credit scores and credit histories, and may indeed harm those people from getting loans for other things in the future. We don't believe you have the authorization to do most anything of what you're doing. And so we will continue to press you under what authorization you're doing what you're doing. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back to her.
And the gentlelady yields back. Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar. Gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Stevens.
Ms. Stevens is present. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming to speak with us. I've very much appreciated the opportunities I've had to discuss my passion around helping the 200,000 COVID-19 orphans in the United States of America and what we're going to do to help them. I also deeply appreciate you coming before this committee as we're examining this year's budget. It's a profound and deep irony that this committee, which has some of the greatest opportunities to benefit the young people of America, had to take a vote last week in a committee markup on Congresswoman Jahana Hayes's bill to invest in mental health resources for college students. And we had to take a vote on an amendment that would strip the protections for LGBTQ students. And it's further ironic that that is the priority of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle when we have yet again witnessed another tragic and horrible shooting. And yes, we pray for, we honor, we mourn with those families of the 19 students. I'm not sure, Mr. Secretary, if you had a chance to hear the testimonial, the witness statement from the young boy who survived that mass shooting. But everything we are doing as lawmakers does not make sense if it is not prioritizing the safety of our students. And we are failing at that. And I know, Mr. Secretary, that this is a pain for you. a pain point for you, a pain for your heart. I know that in the cabinet of President Biden, you are trying to do everything you can, and we will continue to support you in that effort. But the misguided attempts of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, all 17, who voted to strip away protections of LGBTQ students at the college level seeking mental health, when we have gun violence after gun violence. And by the way, they don't take the votes even to study gun violence in our schools. So interagency efforts to promote safety, Mr. Secretary, are paramount. And I wanted to ask you about a passion point of mine, which is around the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, IDEA funding. As we know, the FY 2023 budget, a $3.3 billion increase for IDEA grants to states, the largest two-year increase ever for the program, and an amount that puts us on a path to fully funding IDEA, the $250 million for IDEA Part D to support the pipeline of special education teachers and personnel, which is so important. And I was just wondering, Mr. Secretary, if you could lend us some of your time in speaking to why these significant increases in funding for IDEA are needed.
Thank you for that, Congresswoman Stevens. And let me just put an exclamation point if I could. 60% of our LGBTQ youth who wanted mental health care this last year didn't have access to it. And this is a group of students that has told us repeatedly the pandemic has increased the anxiety, the trauma. So thank you for sharing that. IDEA grants, let me tell you, as a principal, as a teacher, as a school district leader, the work to make sure that all students have access to high quality learning through individualized educational plans based on the different abilities that our students have is critical. Many times these plans are what allow for additional paraeducators to support students, assistive technology. It gives students the ability to speak and speech services. So for us, this is fundamental. And I'll just be brief in the next part. The pandemic exacerbated gaps between our students with disabilities and our other students. And we've heard loud and clear from parents that they need more now. So this money is critical.
Yeah, well, I think to everyone watching back home for this very important hearing, it's very clear who is standing for all students, who's making sure that we are pushing for equal funding for IDEA, the full funding for IDEA, which is a critical part of my mission on behalf of Oakland County, and as a representative who has brought attention to this topic through town halls and whatnot. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, too, for the data point, because it's sad when we have to take votes, which, by the way, many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle weren't even present for that vote, when we can't even take the steps to invest in mental health for LGBTQ and also can't do the basic work to keep students safe. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Great hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I'd like to add a quick response from your opening statement. I'm one who's benefited throughout my life from thoughts and prayers of others when they're going through difficult times. And as leaders who represent this great nation, a nation based on Judeo-Christian values, we should never present our fellow Americans with a false notion it's too late and too uncool to lean on our faith, prayers, and God to support each other. Because we're in one nation under God, it is the one way that we can connect with those experiencing dark times. And I'm sure the community of Uvalde would really appreciate it. So, Mr. Secretary, over the last year, the price of gasoline in Utah has increased more than 37%. Between Utah's open enrollment in public schools and charter schools, many parents in my district drive their children to school outside of the neighborhood. Families accessing school choice in Utah are not wealthy and are struggling to keep up with inflation and rising transportation costs. I've heard from several schools in my district that the drops in student attendance are in part due to higher costs at the pump. We are told that inflation is transitory, and yet the cost of living for families increased last month by 8.3%, which acknowledge that the inflation is negatively impacting the choice of school education for students and their parents.
I didn't hear the question there. I heard you sharing about the cost of inflation.
Which you acknowledge that that inflation is negatively impacting the choice of school education for students and their parents?
I don't have information on that. I do recognize the challenge that inflation has caused on all aspects of life. Whether or not it has resulted in lessening school choice, I'm hearing what you're sharing with me, and I recognize that this is happening in your community. But I don't have any other information that tells me that this is an issue in other communities.
Just know across the country, when parents have to get in a car and drive a distance to make sure the kids' education, it is impacting all parents who care that much and trying to invest in their children that way. Okay, I would like to, like you, I was devastated to watch the events in Texas unfold. I was dismayed to see how some members of Congress and other elected officials took such a harsh political line so quickly. I speak on behalf of many of my colleagues who want productive and not divisive conversations on this topic. I'll be happy to sit down and discuss what we can do to help school address these security issues. Recently, I looked into what school safety programs exist, which are presently funded by the federal government. I learned that we fund related programs in several agencies, and those programs are written to address prevention, mitigation and response, and recovery. Mr. Secretary, your agency implements a lot of these programs. Can you tell us the current status of school safety programs under your jurisdiction, what guidance you have issued to address school safety, and if you consult with other agencies to ensure that the guidance is responsive, current, and also coordinated?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your sentiment about wanting to partner with us, and I welcome an opportunity for my team to meet with yours to discuss this, because I agree with you. It should be bipartisan, and we should be working together on this. We have a team that is developing more strategies, bringing together different strategies from across the country. We have the Project SERVE, which is School Emergency Reduction of Violence funds and team that has been in contact already with this community in Texas and will continue to be. And part of this team's work is to lift up practices of what's happening across the country. So it's an ongoing process, but happy to have my team meet with yours to hear your thoughts and to work together on this.
Okay, thank you. I just want to wrap up with something that was talked about earlier. I agree with the concerns of an answer that you gave to one of my colleagues earlier about keeping secrets from parents. It was, in all due respect, a pretty different or weird answer, but my parents, my dad and my mom and dad were both educators, but never would they suggest that a teacher is a parent of children who are not theirs. You're keeping secrets from parents regarding their children's physical and mental health being a secret that they are not learning ABCs, but instead of going through indoctrination or gender transitioning is extremely disturbing. To be honest with you, it's hard to believe that any father or mother, this Tara's testimony, would be okay with secrets being kept from them regarding the health and welfare of their children. With that, I want to yield any remaining time I have to Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Secretary, what specific language in the ESEA authorizes you to add additional requirements to the charter school program? We think the statute's clear about your requirement to consult with charter school officials before developing rules and regulations, and you are not authorized to do it without that consultation.
Thank you. I know the time is up, but I do want to respond. This is for discretionary funds and their proposals that we have.
So you have discretion, you have authorization under the statutes because they're discretionary funds? Is that your answer?
We have authority to make proposals.
But you're adding additional requirements to the charter school program. What is the authorization in the statute?
So what we're trying to do is increase accountability, engagement, which are all things that I think I've heard from you are important in education. And I think there's a misconception that we don't support quality public charter schools. Mm-hmm. And I want to be very clear that that's not the case.
You're not answering the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I yield back my time. Thank you for that time.
Thank you. The next is the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Secretary Cardona for beginning today's hearing. by acknowledging the 19 families who won't be telling stories to their babies tonight, who won't see their child go on to middle school or take pictures of them before their first school dance. We won't get to help them decide which college to attend to or take them to college or what their life plans are. You know, it's not just them, but we know that Uvalde, what we've learned of it, is a tight-knit community, and the whole community is suffering. Y señor Cardona, gracias por hablar en español para nuestra gente, porque no hay palabras, ¿no?, para describir el dolor y la indignación que sentimos por la muerte de estos inocentes niños. América, todos deberíamos llorar y sufrir para las familias. En lugar de estar ahí para aprender y conocer tus amigos, ¿no?, estás ahí llorando. Es una tragedia para toda nuestra nación. And my constituents and I are sick of inaction. The House passed multiple bills to address the gun violence crisis, some of them even with some Republican votes, bipartisan. And all we need is 10 Republican senators who have the courage to stand with the nearly 90% of Americans who support sensible gun safety legislation. You know, and we could use the help of more Republican House members, the Republicans on this committee and others who are going to put our children as a priority instead of the gun lobby, because we can't effectively teach our nation's children if everybody isn't safe in those schools. So Secretary Cardona, thank you for the work you're doing with regards to safety and for your very measured and intelligent responses today. I want to talk about minority serving institutions, because every institution of higher education in my district is a minority serving institution, and the majority of those are Hispanic serving institutions, or HSIs. And in the wake of COVID-19, HSIs are being asked to do more with less as they continue to educate and serve their students in buildings which are not adequate, with inadequate funding, because we all know that HSIs are severely underfunded. So I noticed the $236.7 million request in your budget, and question, I think it is continues to be insufficient in meeting the needs of the 559 HSIs and the 5.1 million students they educate and serve. Secretary, how do you envision closing the disproportionate inequitable gap for the 559 HSIs with a request for Title V Part A at $236.7 million?
Thank you for your remarks and for your passion around not only Uvalde, but the responsibility we have to protect our babies. You know, Hispanic serving institutions, TCCUs, HBCUs, they all provide tremendous value. They punch above their weight. And in many cases, these institutions also do not have the level of funds that they need to keep up with research and development and make sure that they can continue to grow. We're proud that in this new budget proposal, there's $450 million proposed for a new initiative to expand research and development and infrastructure at minority serving institutions such as HSIs as well. So we recognize, and the president's been very clear from day one, the importance of these institutions and how we need to make sure that they have the funds needed to not only serve the students during the pandemic, but also grow for their institutions as well.
Thank you. I also want to discuss an issue that is brought up to me wherever I go, and that is education workforce shortages, especially the need to recruit a diverse workforce. Here in New Mexico, it is Native American and Latino bilingual education speakers. We don't have a lot of time, but how are you going to be working to support states and school districts in strengthening and diversifying the educator workforce?
Thank you. Our proposal does ask for funds there. And so I'm going to be very specific. I want pipeline programs in our high schools. I want high school students getting high school credit and college credits and be connected to a four-year school, so that four-year school, when they graduate, they're ready to go back into that community that served them so well to become teachers. I want to use the funds to initiate programs that have apprenticeships around teacher preparation programs, mentorship programs to retain our teachers too. It's not just getting them, it's keeping them in the profession. And I want to make sure that we're supporting our teachers and elevating the profession so more people want to go into it.
Thank you, Secretary Cardona. And that issue of getting them from the community, because then they'll stay in the community, is so key. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing.
Thank you. My colleague from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, I realize it's difficult when you're on the losing side of every issue and the truth about your policies are not popular with the American people, but I hope you can also appreciate that it's our job to exercise oversight on behalf of Americans and expose the harmful impact of these policies. So your succinct and truthful answers would be most appreciated. In your testimony, Mr. Secretary, you said that you were calling for more COVID funding for schools. Why should we do this when schools are requesting more time to spend the previously allocated funds, and some are even spending them on things like football fields and weight rooms?
With regard to American Rescue Plan use of funds, I can tell you I'm proud of what I've seen when I visited the 32 states. Schools were able to reopen with better ventilation systems. I visited White Plains, New York, and their school was able to open as quickly as they did.
Okay, well, I'm not claiming my time. I'm not asking what they might have used it for. I'm saying, why in the world would we give them more money when they haven't spent the money that's already been allocated? And some of them are using for things that obviously have nothing to do with the virus situation. You know, it doesn't cost anything to stop doing the things that harmed our children over these past 2 years. Switching to student loans for a moment, the Biden administration's moratorium on student loans has already cost taxpayers some $100 billion before any ill-conceived effort this fall in a desperate attempt to buy votes that we might try to forgive student loans this fall. Who do you think should pay a person's student loan? Who should that debt be transferred to?
Congressman, if there are cases where you think money is not being used, please work with our team, because we want to make sure that we're following up.
Who do you think should pay a person's student loan if they don't want to pay it, or who should that debt be transferred to?
I think our loan forgiveness work this year is something that has helped many Americans.
I want you to answer me specifically. Who do you think should pay a person's student loan if they don't want to pay it, or they can't pay it, or they just wish they didn't have it? And who should that debt be transferred to?
I'm not sure the person who took out the loan should be paying the loan. If they weren't misled,
the person who took out the loan should pay the loan.
Right.
Okay, so you agree we shouldn't have somebody who didn't go to college shouldn't have to pay someone else's student loan. Is that correct?
I think I know where you're going with this, and what I would want to say to that is there was poor oversight.
Okay, so do you think someone who didn't go to college should be forced through their taxes to pay somebody else's student loan?
There was poor oversight, and I believe.
Do you think somebody who didn't go to college should be forced to pay somebody else's student loan? Don't tell them about oversight. You think somebody who didn't go to college should be forced to pay somebody else's student loan?
I see where you're going with the question.
How about somebody who worked their way through school so they wouldn't have student loans? Should they have to pay somebody else's student loan?
The public service loan forgiveness program.
Okay, how about somebody who has already paid off their student loan? They just doubled down, they worked hard, they worked 2 or 3 jobs, they paid off their student loan. I mean, you do know where the money comes from, right? You do know the money's from the American people. You realize government has no money, right? So you cannot forgive student loans. We like to use that term. You realize that it's just transferred to somebody else. So my question is, who should it be transferred to, or who should it be forced to pay for that? Especially when 60% of these student loan balances are held by high income earners who went to grad school and so forth. There's a disproportionate impact towards high income earners if we forgive all student loans. So who should have to pay that?
So the bipartisan public service loan forgiveness is an example of a loan forgiveness program that was bipartisan passed and was mismanaged.
Okay, well, thank you. That's what I was referring to earlier. Just would like a succinct answer on the impact of this administration's policies. I've got a Federal Student Loan Integrity Act that I've sponsored along with Jim Banks, who's on this committee, that would prohibit you from extending the moratorium on student loan repayments, at least, let alone forgiving. School choice. You said today that you support school choice. You said that during someone else's earlier question, and that parents should be able to decide where their kids go to school. Will you help us advocate for Congress to pass school choice legislation?
I don't push for specific legislation. I ask that you work in collaboration.
So do you support legislation that would support school choice? For example, I've got HR 3704, the Choice Act, which would allow struggling families the choice of where their education dollars go. They'd follow their children to the school or educational opportunity of their choice, or a 529 savings account. Are you in favor of such things?
I'm in favor of making sure our public schools have access to adequate funding so that all students have an option, including students.
Another question for you, if I may.
I would love to respond to the previous question.
Have you gotten an update from regarding Attorney General Garland's memo about going after school parents? Have you got an update on that? We're having trouble getting answers on what the status of that review is. Have you got an update on that?
I support choice, but I also don't support choice.
Have you got an update on the targeting of school parents based on the October 4 memo from AG Garland?
My staff might have received information on that. I have not, but I'd be happy to have my team reach out to you if you have questions about the rollout of that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Cardona, for being here today. And I apologize for the tone and attitude that you have been experiencing from some of our questioners. Dr. Cardona, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the life of every American and has had an especially dramatic effect on our nation's young people. And I have to tell you, I'm candidly very proud to have helped enact the American Rescue Plan last spring, which sent $130 billion in federal funding to schools and students. Schools in Pennsylvania, I represent Pennsylvania 7, received more than $5 billion through this law, and schools just in my home of the Lehigh Valley received hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm very proud that this funding is being used today to safely keep schools physically open and to get students back on track. And I have to say, as a matter of pride, I want to tell you a couple of examples. First of all, the Easton Area School District in my district has hired new staff to provide supplemental instruction to help students catch up on their academics. That school district has also purchased new technology for students, more library books, and more STEM materials. The Bethlehem Area School District has paid for new HVAC systems for 3 buildings to improve air quality and keep students safer in their classrooms. That district has also hired new instructional coaches to improve students' math and literacy skills and to support their mental health needs by providing extra social and emotional learning. The Allentown School District, the most distressed public school district that we have, has paid for facilities upgrades and HVAC improvements, which were deeply necessary because some buildings in the district were built in the 1800s. In addition, the district has prioritized programs to address learning loss, including academic recovery and acceleration efforts. And I'm just proud to share these stories with you to emphasize the ways in which the funding that was brought into law as a result of the American Rescue Plan has continued to support our students and educators. But Dr. Cardona, what I'd like to do is have you highlight some additional ways that you're aware of that schools and educators across the nation have been using ARP money to enable safe in-person learning and make up for lost instructional time. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if any cases particularly come to mind, I'd love to hear them.
So I'll tell you, I visited New Mexico recently and I was in a high school and I spoke to a student. We had a roundtable. This was really poignant for me. This young man said, my life was spiraling out of control during the pandemic. His mother died due to COVID. And he said that he was engaging in very bad activity and got to a point one day where there was going to be an act of violence committed toward another student. And if it weren't for the restorative circles that the school did with a staff member whose salary is paid for by the American Rescue Plan, that he might have committed that act. He said to me literally, this saved my life. And now he's on a path to mental health support and graduation. Okay, so that's one example. I visited Oregon. I saw summer programs with double and triple the size of number of students who are benefiting from social interaction. These are students who for the year prior were working on a laptop or on a device and didn't have social interaction. We know the importance of social interaction for young children. I mentioned White Plains before. The improved airflow allowed the schools to reopen quicker. After school programs for students to get reading support because the reading instruction wasn't what it should have been during the pandemic. Mental health counselors, New York is hiring hundreds of school social workers for their schools with the American Rescue Plan dollars.
I'm going to
And
stop you there for a second, Secretary, because you've been talking about mental health, and my next question was going to be about that. I think it's wonderful the way states and districts have been able to use ARP funds to implement trauma-informed practices and support students' social and emotional and mental health needs. Can you tell this committee why this extra funding and support is necessary, and why will it continue to be needed for the next few years?
Thank you for that second part of the question. This is not a one-time thing. Mental health needs were greater before the pandemic. But now, I mean, research study after research study shows that it's at a point now of crisis. The Surgeon General called it a crisis in our schools, a crisis in our country, the mental health needs. So we have anxiety levels up, suicide rates are up. So if we want to protect lives, we need to look at mental health supports, not only as a fix for the pandemic, but an underlying foundation of successful schools that meet the needs of students holistically.
Thank you very much. I would love to talk to you further about this, but my time has run out. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you for the time.
Thank
you,
you.
Secretary.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. McLean, is not on the screen. Gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fox, and thank you, Secretary, for being here to answer questions. I want to follow up on with the Representative Stefanik's line of questioning. Since you said no to having anything to do with soliciting the letter requesting that the DOJ investigate concerned parents as domestic terrorists, will you instead commit to call upon Attorney General Garland to rescind his memo asking the FBI to investigate parents? That's just a yes or no.
If you have questions for the DOJ, please reach out to DOJ about their letters.
Okay, if I assume that's a no, but let me turn to my attention to your written testimony today. Mr. Secretary, you only used the word parent once in your testimony, even then not in any way that would indicate how important parents' involvement is in their children's education. Do you believe parents should have a role in the education of their children, yes or no?
Yes, and I believe if you allow me to follow up, I can share with you what we've done in the last year.
Well, that's my next question. What role do you think parents have in determining appropriate curriculum for their children in our schools?
I've always said parents are their child's first and most influential teachers. We only play a supporting role in the education system. As a parent myself, it's critically important that I'm engaged and that I'm involved in the process. So I want to be very clear about that. When we ask for states to submit plans on the American Rescue Plan, how they're going to use the money, stakeholder engagement was a requirement. Even though it wasn't passed by Congress that it was a requirement, we required that states provide that. So, and we've had conversations with more than 8,400 parents in 1 year because we want to hear from them. It's not just talk. We've done that. In terms of curriculum, I do believe parents' engagement is critical for the holistic experience of children, including topics like curriculum. And that's why we have boards of education set up, made up in many cases by parents. And that's why they should have public comment portions. I support that. And as a former assistant superintendent, I value the input of those local parents on the benefit of curriculum, but also the challenges that they felt the school was providing.
Well, you know, that goes back to the Attorney General and the letter sent to the, by the DOJ. Evidently, they don't think that parents should have a bigger role in that curriculum. And I believe that parents should have a bigger role in the curriculum their children are learning. And honestly, I'm sick of bureaucrats telling us what is inappropriate or appropriate for our own children. If it were up to me, sir, I swan. I would just do away with the Department of Ed and Labor altogether and give the authority back to the states. That's just me. But in the time left, I want to yield to Representative and Ranking Member Fox.
Thank you, Representative Harshbarger. Mr. Secretary, FSA and CFPB are clearly in regular communications as their actions and press strategies are obviously coordinated. I'm not asking, I'm simply observing a fact. What I do want to know, though, is why you aren't coordinating or providing the same clear and consistent guidance to borrowers and your contractors about how the various waiver programs and the return to repayment are supposed to work. I'm not talking similar or close. I mean the same exact guidance so everyone understands the rule of the roll, so you or CFPB can't come back months or years later and change your minds. Borrowers, as well as your contracted partners, deserve detailed and consistent guidance from all government agencies. Mr. Secretary, is the lack of communication a failure of your department to develop detailed plans before putting out flashy press releases? Or is this vague, deceptive, or non-existent guidance intentional because the full plan is not actually known at the time of the flashy press hits?
Dr. Fox, with all due respect, I think those are two bad options that I have. I can tell you, we want to work with you. And if there are ways that you think we need to improve communication, as you said at the beginning, let's work together. As I said, when I sent you that letter, 7-8 months ago, there's so much commonality. Let's work together on the things we can improve together. I believe we're in this situation because of poor information, and we're working really hard to be clear with our borrowers, to provide clarity so that they're not misled. Like so many places misled them, which is why we're doing borrower defense the way we are.
Well, maybe it's because your contracted partners and the loan servicers aren't getting clear information from the department on how to handle it. You should not be bypassing those people because they're the partners you have to help you do it. You can't do this through the department. You've contracted with the people and you're treating them very, very poorly.
Ms. Fox, you're on mute. And
yeah, I'm sorry. I yield to the gentlewoman from Tennessee.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jones, gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Cardona, for all your work and for your patience today. Before turning to my questions, I want to first respond to my Republican colleagues' claim that school districts are not spending COVID-19 relief funding. The federal government has awarded 100% of elementary and secondary school emergency relief funding across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And as of March 23rd, 2022, approximately 91% of the CARES Act ESSER funds have been drawn down or spent by states and districts. And each week, more funds are drawn down. And according to submitted state and district plans, which are required by the American Rescue Plan, ESSER funds are being used to implement evidence-based practices that address learning loss and support students' social, emotional, and mental health. And I'd like to point out for my Republican colleagues that focusing on spending data alone is misleading. In a recent report, the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office found that it's important to consider a state or district's financial commitments or obligations to paint a more complete picture. For example, schools that have used ESSER funds to hire teachers or school counselors will spend ESSER money each time payroll is paid from now until 2024. And likewise, many school districts are required to pay out contracts only after all services have been rendered. So a district that has a year-long contract with a tutoring company might spend ESSER funds to pay out the contract at the end of the year. The federal government has obligated COVID-19 relief funding, and as we have heard today, states and districts are using these funds to help schools recover. Now I'd like to turn to my questions. Mr. Secretary, as we know, this pandemic has taken a tremendous toll on our nation's youth. There's been a 25% increase in pediatric emergency room admissions for mental health cases since the start of the pandemic. So we know addressing mental health needs has become increasingly important for our nation's youth. And that's why I have introduced HR 5526 the Improving Mental Health Wellness in Schools Act to add mental health education to existing guidelines for local school wellness policies and to increase resources for more mental health providers in our schools. We know these resources are desperately needed to help our students. I've heard it from the superintendents in my district, North Carolina 6. But we've also been hearing, Mr. Secretary, from our educators, our first responders, and our healthcare workers that we simply don't have enough mental health providers in our country. And I was extremely pleased to see that the president's fiscal year 2023 budget proposal includes $1 billion for the creation of a new grant program to increase the number of licensed mental health professionals in our schools. Can you speak to the importance of this proposed funding and talk about how the department will work to ensure that this program has its intended effect?
Sure, thank you very much. And I appreciate the comments you made earlier about how districts are actually using the money and how you obligate it. You don't spend it all in one day. When the services are done, that's when they get the payment. But yeah, thank you for bringing up the fact that, this budget does propose long-term remedies to problems that we're dealing with now, not just short-term remedies. What it does is provides funds to create programs that help develop the mental health personnel that we know we're going to need moving forward. So it's not only embracing the need for more mental health support workers through some of the other funding, but investing in programs that will lead to sustainable production of highly qualified mental health support staff. We're proud of that, and we're hopeful that this could really launch model programs that could be replicated throughout the country, not only with mental health, but in special education, bilingual education. There's so many areas that are shortage areas, and I'm pleased that this budget does put funds to try to address that problem.
Mr. Secretary, I'm also pleased to see that the president's budget requests an increase of $752 million over fiscal year 2021 levels for HBCUs, MSIs, and TCCUs, including $450 million initiative to expand research and development infrastructure at these institutions. I have 3 excellent HBCUs and an excellent MSI in my district. Can you talk for just 10 seconds I have left about the importance of that funding?
Not only have 4 seconds, they're punching above their weight, and this is a recognition that education is the great equalizer in our country.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Do we need a 10-minute break?
Are you asking me, sir?
Yeah.
We could go a few more. If that's
Okay. Thank you. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, during the BLM riots in 2020, many left-wing school districts ended their contracts with police departments and removed school resource officers from schools as part of the left's defund the police movement. Does the Biden administration now believe that the defund the police movement was a mistake and officers do belong in schools?
I've never mentioned anything about defunding police.
Sir, for 2 years, the Democrats have supported defunding the police. Because of their defund the police movement, school resource officers have been removed from schools. Minneapolis, Portland, Denver, Seattle school districts removed police from schools. So I want to know, do you now say it was a mistake and that officers do belong in schools?
As a former assistant superintendent in a district that had school resource officers that worked really closely with our educators, our students, we found there to be great value there. And as I said earlier, I've never commented defund the police. Well,
the Democrats definitely supported defunding the police for 2 years. They painted on the sidewalks of burning cities. They shouted it while burning down police stations in Minneapolis. Vice President Harris herself raise money to bail out the rioters, and your favorite leftist TV stations have covered it all. All Americans saw it. And so now what I want to know, you represent the Biden administration. Has the Biden administration changed their stance? Do they still support defunding the police, or do they now say school resource officers belong in the schools? We would like to know.
I'm not sure if you were present at the State of the Union, but the president said we need to fund the police more, not defund the police. I recall that sitting there, and I felt pretty strongly that that was a clear message there.
Right. I call that hypocrisy. I taught my children that, what you do is more important than what you say. And so I will assume then that you're saying that you still support defunding the police, the Biden administration, and that you do not support having these resource officers in our schools. And moving on, Mr. Secretary, this week, outrageously, it was revealed that the National School Boards Association wanted the Biden administration to use the military to prevent parents from attending school board meetings to speak out in opposition to the Biden education agenda. Do you believe that President Biden should use the military or the FBI's domestic terrorism unit to prevent parents from opposing his policies at school board meetings?
I believe we should fund police with adequate supports. So please do not mischaracterize my responses, which I thought were pretty clear. With regard to your question.
So you're saying then that the Biden administration has changed their stance. They now support funding the police, and they have changed their stance. They do support putting resource officers in the schools.
What I'm
so
telling you.
Glad to hear that. I'm glad you've changed your mind, because we all want our children to be safe. Thank you.
Yes, we do.
Well, like I say, hypocrisy is when the actions don't follow up with the words. And so my next question has to do with this past week. The National School Boards Association now has revealed that they want the Biden administration to use the military to prevent parents from attending school board meetings. Do you believe that President Biden should use the military or the FBI's domestic terrorism unit to prevent parents from opposing his policies at school board meetings?
Parents should have access to school board meetings, and their voice does matter. If you have questions for the Department of Justice, I would suggest you direct them toward the Department of Justice.
Yeah, but the Biden administration did send a memo authorizing the FBI to go after parents for showing up at school board meetings. So do you support or not support using the FBI against parents?
I support parents having their voices heard, especially during this pandemic, when they know their children better than anyone else. We should work as partners, and that's what I support. And that's what everyone at this department supports. And you can tell by the fact that we've listened to over 8,000 parents, and we'll continue to do so.
But we all know that the whole point of that DOJ memo was to send a message to parents to scare them from showing up. Wasn't that the point? Well, what was the point of the memo then?
You'd have to ask the DOJ. What I will tell you is that we welcome parents' input now more than ever.
Yeah, well, you also said parents should not be the primary stakeholder in children's education. So, Mr. Secretary, to close up here, every time you've appeared before this committee, I have asked you questions about parents' rights in education, because the Biden administration is launching a coordinated assault against parents' rights and the ability of parents to make the best educational decisions for their children. We saw the result of your woke educational agenda in Virginia, where parents were outraged by the Biden administration's policies, and they loudly stood up for parental rights. And I have to say that I look forward to parents across the country sending you the same message very soon. And with that, I yield back.
And ladies, time has expired, and we'll now take a 10-minute break. Let's see, the next person in line on the screen is a gentleman from New York, Mr. Bowman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important meeting. Before I get to my questions, first of all, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Before I get to my questions, I just want to mention how impressive your stellar career has been in education, Mr. Secretary. You were a teacher in our schools. You taught the youngest and most vulnerable among us. You've been a school administrator. You've been a district superintendent. You've been commissioner of education for a state. And now you sit here as the Secretary of Education. Your career has been stellar. You have served our kids admirably. You were one of the only state leaders to open schools safely. And I want to thank you for that. Even prior to the full American Rescue Plan, you opened schools safely. So thank you for your stellar service and stellar career. Just wanted to mention that. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to ask a question about common sense gun reform. You know, Democrats have passed common sense gun reform in the House over many years, and gun reform continues to be blocked in the Senate. Can you speak briefly to how common sense gun reform, which would keep assault rifles out of the hands of those who are most dangerous, how would that help decrease the amount of mass shootings and keep kids alive in our schools across the country?
Thank you for the remarks earlier. You know, common sense. If more guns means we're safe, we should be the safest country in the world. I feel like in order to protect our students, there is no easy answer. We need to work together on it. But a recent poll found that over 80% of the folks in our country agree or support with some level of red flag provision. You know, and 81% of Americans support background checks for private gun sales and gun show sales. Like, the American people, both sides agree that common sense actions are needed now. We're becoming desensitized. I said at the beginning, we cannot normalize this. We cannot ask our educators to be going in addition to addressing the disparities that were made worse, now to shoulder this. We need to do better.
100%. And as a former educator myself, I know you are grieving today for the 21 lives that were lost in Texas the other day. And I know you still grieve for what happened at Sandy Hook, and you grieve for Columbine, and you grieve for Virginia Tech, and you grieve for the 3,656 school shootings that have happened since Sandy Hook. So I want to thank you again for your service. I have another question about student debt. As you know, American borrowers across this country hold more than 1.7 trillion in federal student debt. I speak with constituents in my district, and so many of them carry student debt. It's our young people and it's our elders. I frequently hear from constituents in their 60s and 70s who are still trying to pay off decades-old student debt, and they've paid back far more than they ever borrowed because of compounding interest. This debt needs to be canceled. It has been predatory and it is crushing. Looking forward, we absolutely need to have free public college and free community college, in my opinion, but we also need to start by canceling student debt, which has profited off of everyday Americans for far too long. Two quick questions. One, I'd like to get more clarity around the 1.7 trillion plus in student debt. How much of the 1.7 trillion is made up of the principal balance, and how much is accrued interest? And the second question is, how many people have paid more than they originally borrowed, but still have a student debt balance because of interest?
Thank you for the questions, and I agree with you. The system is broken. There are too many people that are afraid of even thinking about higher education because of the fear, and we have to fix the system. We have to be bold and make sure that we're not there. No, we're not there again in 5 years. Those two questions are very specific, and I don't want to venture to guess right now a number, but I will have my team follow up with you on those very specific questions. But I think your point is well made. There are people who are now paying just interest, not even touching the principal. That's unacceptable. We have to do better with that. And while we can't set interest rates, that's an act of Congress, we are putting together regulations that will improve this. We agree with you 100%.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us. Since I think the last time we visited, I've been part of some discussions on the student loan issue. So I kind of wanted to go back to that. there's a couple of things I think I'm hearing from my constituents on that front that I'm not sure if the department has had the ability to gather data on. And I just listened to Representative Bowman kind of talk a little bit more about a deeper dive on, where we're at. But I think what I'm hearing is the one thing that's out there that is probably not being directly addressed is, and it's kind of a nuance, it's the Parent Plus loans. It appears that many families throughout America have kind of this informal arrangement between the parent and the student, where the student obviously approaches the parent to say, is there any way that you can pick up the debt on this tuition bill? And then informally says, but don't worry about it, mom or dad. When it comes down to actually making the payments when I graduate, I'll make the payments myself. So there's kind of this informal arrangement, and I have no idea if you have any numbers on that, or if that's even tracked as to who's actually writing the check every month to pay off some of these loans. That would be kind of the first question I might ask you.
Thank you for that question. And as a parent who's now thinking about that, my own son, I recognize that this is something that many parents across the country are wondering, and I'm sure in your district as well. But I don't have specific information on that. But it is so nuanced that I wouldn't dare to make a statement without having it be verified. What I will do is, Congressman Fitzgerald, have someone from my higher ed team discuss, if the parent is writing the check, what happens if the student qualifies for some loan forgiveness. And I think that's a very, very, very valid question that I want to make sure I give you the right information on.
Yeah, so that leads to the second part of my question, which is, as you do the expanded PSLF, it absolutely would be something that I would hope that the department would somehow be able to consider if there is some type of final calculation. And that's without even, making any judgments on how much forgiveness should there be, or should there be forgiveness at all. It's not news to you, I don't think, but the other thing I've heard quite a bit when you talk to people about this issue is they're just frustrated by the interest rate. And if there was some way of bringing that interest rate down, and I understand you already made it very clear that's an act of Congress, that certainly that would have just as dramatic impact on the overall situation nationwide as some forgiveness would be as part of PSLF. So it would be another thing to consider. Let me just shift gears real quick. As a member of the Small Business Committee, one of the things that we are reminded of all the time is PPP loans, and it's been determined to be successful. PPP loans saved many small businesses throughout the nation. The second part I would say is we are hearing from districts about some of the COVID relief funds and whether it was part of the CARES Act. How are you guys doing on tracking that and making sure that districts, because you're hearing these stories out there that the money was misspent or misallocated. And I know as a member of small business, we are having a very difficult time tracking how those funds were spent. And then the direct SBA loans that have been made, the clawback on some of those as a result of fraud and abuse is significant. So, this is a different arena, but it feels kind of the same. And that's why I would ask how the department's doing on tracking some of those funds.
Thank you for those questions. And, I remember the first part of the pandemic when I was in Connecticut, the commissioner having conversations about PPP and how we're making sure it's being used and some of those investigations. With that experience, we wanted to, at the Department of Ed, make sure that we're putting in checks and balances. We have, I think we have a robust system here. We have, every district has to submit a plan publicly, has to be on their website. We have quarterly monitoring reviews. We created a program called ARP Paths, and it's another form of public accountability. So it's not only accountability to us, but more importantly to the parents, to the students, to the folks in the community. We do annual reporting also, and we're working closely with our Inspector General and auditors to make sure they have all the information they need as they do their investigations as well.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Next gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. It's good to see you again. I also want to say thank you to Representative Fitzgerald for making Wisconsin proud. The way he asked questions he may disagree with the Secretary was great. It wasn't MAGA open mic night, which the Secretary's had to endure a little too much of this afternoon. So, hey, Fitz, thank you. You did Wisconsin proud. And I just want to point that out. You know, I know a few people have said they have no words for what happened in Texas. I do. Dereliction of duty of Congress and state legislatures to not act. Far too long, these institutions have been afraid of the gun manufacturers and their lobby NRA rather than caring about the kids that we're supposed to protect in our schools. So again, Mr. Secretary, your moral outrage in the beginning of your remarks, I appreciated and felt with you, and thank you for that. I want to ask you if I can get to two areas, but one specifically. We had a special hearing yesterday in appropriations talking about teacher shortages. And I believe in your opening remarks, you mentioned something about $350 million that might help go towards attracting and retaining teachers. And we had a great list of witnesses. Some of the suggestions that came through were things like the Hawkins Center of Excellence, providing more support to grow your own programs, community schools to provide wraparound services, the Teach grants. Can you just give us a little bit of a deep dive on what you're doing? Because in Wisconsin, you know, we had a significant drop off in people applying to our School of Education post some actions that happened a number of years ago in the legislature. In my Madison school district, which has been one of the most attractive districts for people, used to be almost impossible to get in. Now, sometimes they're getting 2 or 3 applications for an open position. We've got a real problem here, and I see it across the district. Love to hear what you're going to do in this area.
Thank you for acknowledging that. And, you know, first and foremost, we're going to lift the profession and really honor educators and make sure that we're listening to them as we reimagine schools. I think, you know, teacher salary, working conditions, and teacher voice do matter. And that's what's going to bring people into the profession. But we have to have programs that incentivize it. I'm really proud that the budget proposal includes $350 million to improve teacher recruitment and retention, $132 for teacher quality partnerships, like Grow Your Own programs, which I really want to see because it takes folks from the community, gives them training, opportunities to go to higher education institutions, and then they go back. You mentioned the Hawkins Center of Excellence. To increase the diversity in the teaching profession, we want to make sure data shows all students benefit when they are instructed by teachers from different backgrounds. And $250 million for IDEA Part D, which includes additional teachers for our youngest and most vulnerable students. So I'm really proud of this proposal and the president's commitment to education. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on it.
Yeah, thank you. And just so you know, respect was probably the universal word that everyone brought up. You know, from personal experience, I've heard that directly from teachers. And you know, whatever we can do, again, as you said, to lift the profession, I think is really needed right now. The other issue is the Pell Grant increase. You know, I was very fortunate. I was out with some of my college buddies on Friday night here in Wisconsin, and we got talking about how at the University of Wisconsin, our tuition was $500 a semester. It ain't $500 anywhere a semester anymore. And, you know, even then, we had student loans. I came from a lower income family, so I had Pell Grants. I worked throughout, never took a spring break because I had to work during that time so I could pay for school. And I'm glad to not lift that ladder back up from other people. And I think the increase in Pell is really significant. Can you just talk about that and the goal that I know many of us are trying to get to, which is doubling Pell Grants?
Yes, I'm happy to. So we know, you know, college affordability is like a runaway train, and we're trying to put the brakes on that. We're putting in systems to stop what I call stop the bleeding, right? To make sure that there's a good return on investment. And I'm thankful that we have our partners in the higher ed field who are locking arms with us and working with us. So that's really good. But Pell is the best opportunity to level the playing field, to make education accessible to most students. And you're absolutely right. Back in 1979, Pell was 80% of the cost of attendance at a 4-year public institution. So the Pell Grant would pretty much cover 80% of it. Today, that number is 30%. It was 100% of community colleges. Today, that's at 52%. So it's not enough. We are thankful that we're able to, look at Pell as the equalizer, and we strongly encourage support for Pell. All students benefit from that. Rural communities, urban communities, it's really leveling the playing field. And we're also holding colleges accountable for a return on investment. So it's not one without the other.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the gentlelady from California, Ms. Steele.
Thank you very much, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Dr. Fox. And thank you, Secretary Cardona, for such a long time hearing today. We have spoken a couple of times about the Harvard Asian discrimination case, and I would like to submit for the record a recent amicus brief I led on the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC. Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, without objection.
Thank you. Your administration also filed the brief. The brief said the Harvard admissions intends to treat every applicant as an individual, yet the current administration appears to support Harvard and their racially discriminatory admission policies. Asian American applicants are routinely rated lower than applicants of other races on traits like positive personality, likability, courage, kindness, and being widely respected. How is this not discrimination? As a Secretary of Education, is it okay for a university to discriminate against a student because they are Asian? Is that treating each applicant as an individual?
Thank you for that, Representative Steele. We are firmly in support of providing all students opportunities and fighting against discrimination. I know we have staff looking into that specific issue, and I'd be happy to have my staff follow up with you on where we are with that and kind of the updates on any information we have on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, how would you score me on my likability or courage traits? If you will give me a low score, you don't have to answer this.
I understand the line of questioning, and I understand why you're asking it, and we'll have my staff look into it and provide you an update. But I do appreciate your advocacy on behalf of the students you represent.
Will you commit to requiring schools that receive Title IV funding to have fully transparent and easily accessible admissions policies? Do you agree that if students are being scored on personality traits, students, their parents, and the public have the right to know how use of personality traits in making admissions decisions?
Yeah, parents should know. It should be very clear how the decisions are being made. That's critically important. I think, those are decisions that have to be looked at too when parents are deciding schools. So I'm a big supporter of transparency, clarity around it, and making sure that universities are able to explain how they select students for admission.
Mr. Secretary, as a parent, I believe the school choice is good for my family. The federal government should never create rules that pick winners and losers. The charter school program allows for additional high-quality schooling options that close the achievement gap for low-income families. And I heard during today's hearing that you support charter schools. Why are your intentions to limit choice by proposing new burdensome rules on the charter school program?
We do support high-quality schools, neighborhood schools, charter schools that are serving children. As I said before, I've seen great examples of them. I've highlighted examples of them. And I do believe the proposals, and they're just proposals at this point, are reasonable. We want to make sure across the board, not just with public charters, but all schools, that there's a great level of transparency and accountability. We know that in many places, our charter schools are places of innovation. And we would encourage connections between our charter schools and our neighborhood schools, but it's not a requirement. So we feel they're reasonable. We're listening to the feedback that we have, and we're taking that into account as we move forward with whatever recommendations we're going to put out.
Steele, you got on mute inadvertently.
I'm yield back my rest of the time to Dr. Fox.
Dr. Fox, you only have 15 seconds. It's hard to imagine that you can ask a question and get a response within the next couple of seconds.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
And you used up part of those, so I will yield back.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Espiat.
Mr. Chairman, do you hear me okay?
I can hear you now.
I want to ask the secretary a question about else and the that's going to be provided for English language learners. I know that our efforts are to make students proficient in English as quickly as possible. But if we want to be competitive, we must also allow bilingual and have expertise in dual language. And so I want to know what are you making to get there?
Okay, yes. I firmly agree that, and the research shows that when students are bilingual, they have more opportunities and the learning actually increases. So we have in the proposal $1 billion request for fiscal year 2023. It's $244 million over 22 enacted level. And I couldn't agree with you more. Looking at language as an asset is critical. And if we're going to be competitive internationally, being bilingual is a starting point. In many other countries, students are multilingual. They're bilingual or trilingual.
Okay, my last question.
Yep. Okay, go ahead.
My last question is, what measures is the department taking to ensure they have complete and accurate data for Title I Part D grant recipients?
Thank you. We are working more closely to make sure we're engaging with our stakeholders, our recipients of grants, and seeing how they're drawing down the funds, lifting up best practices. We'll continue to do that moving forward. Happy to follow up with your office if there are specific questions. But oversight of the funds is critical to them meeting the needs of our students.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Gentleman yields back. The other gentleman from New York, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here today to talk about many important issues for our children throughout the United States. I wanted to ask a couple questions regarding the proposed rule change to the charter school program. The section 4307 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act requires the department to consult administrators, teachers, and other individuals involved with the operation of charter schools in the development of any regulations that impact charter schools. Leaders in the charter school community that I talked to could not identify any members of the community who were consulted with the development in regard to the development of this new proposed rule change. Could you tell me how your department complied with 4307, which specific individuals or groups were reached out to in regards to this proposed rule?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we recognize there's some concern and about the proposals from some in the charter community. We can assure you that the process did take in feedback and comments, and it was the open comment period that led to our proposed rules. But because I don't have that specific information with you, I'm happy to have my team follow up with you with very specifics, who was spoken to and who we received comments from.
Okay, thank you. Because I reached out to the likes of the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools, which I would have thought would have been one of the first ones they were not contacted. So I would say if, you know, I would ask your consideration if you did in fact not comply with this, that you might consider pulling back this process and starting it again right. In regards to the rule itself, one of the proposals in that rule would effectively gives de facto veto power over a charter school application to a traditional public school district if it seeks to open. It requires a memorandum of understanding with the district school. You know, having been a co-founder of a charter school in Buffalo, New York, I can tell you that the public school system works with us, but I don't think they would choose to if they had to. They were very comfortable being a monopoly. So I think this is, you know, this is really tipping the hand to the traditional school districts, to the special interests kind of involved with the traditional school districts at the expense of trying to provide children and families who are desperate for high quality choices. So I heard in your recent answer that it was a reasonable proposal. I just beg to differ that is not reasonable, and it is a kind of a backdoor way in my mind of crushing innovation in new charter schools.
Thank you. If I could comment on that, is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. Number one, having experience with charter schools and seeing the benefits that they provide students. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that's why it's really important. Number one, that I communicate that these were proposals. They're not rules yet. And the word was encourage, not require. And I hear what you're saying, and I understand that some community schools or neighborhood schools are the reasons why maybe the partnership won't happen. I've heard from charter school leaders saying, hey, even if we wanted to, maybe the school wouldn't want to. We wouldn't want to hold that against our charters, but we do know that in many cases, there's a lot to be learned when schools do work together. So it was an encouragement. And again, these are proposed rules we haven't completed, but I do appreciate your perspective.
And I would say I also served on the Buffalo School Board for 7 years. And I do believe the challenge and the innovation that came out and the competition that came out by the charter school movement in our city actually improved the Buffalo schools, made us up our game. And, you know, we have collaborated, but a sign off or a requirement that there's no vacancies in the public school system, that if that was a hard and fast rule, it would be detrimental, because typically the vacancies are in schools that kids do not want to attend. So anyway, thank you for your time, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I agree with you on that last point.
Thank you. The other members that wish to be recognized? If not, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Secretary, we heard a suggestion that Democrats support, quote, defund the police. Just for the record, I'd want to point out that I'm not aware of any meaningful number of Democrats that support defund the police. Nobody in leadership, no committee chairs. A handful of members apparently do support that, but it's the suggestion that Democrats support defund the police is not accurate. There is let me ask a question on Robb Elementary School. Were school resource police officers assigned to Robb Elementary? Are you aware?
Sir, I know there are conflicting reports on whether or not there were officers present. So I really don't feel like I have the most up-to-date information.
Okay, well, the evidence I've seen on the effectiveness of school resource officers are that whatever value they have could be provided by counselors, not police officers, and the presence of police tend to add to the school to prison pipeline. So if you could provide for the record studies that show the effectiveness of school resource officers, I'd like to see it. The other is just clarify on, there was a little uncertainty on support for vouchers and public school or private school charters. Could you state whether or not you support private school vouchers and private charters, or whether that support is confined to the public system overseen by the school boards?
Thank you for this opportunity. Without question, as a parent, there might be, for example, I went to a technical high school. Those are public school options that I had. I do not support federal dollars for voucher programs that leave a system gutted so that we have other options and not take care of our neighborhood schools. The overwhelming majority of parents want to choose their neighborhood school, but I do believe choices within the public school options are healthy for families.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware of threats to the lives of school board members?
I am not aware of any current threats to school board members.
And in the some of the meetings where school board members have to be escorted into the school board members by police protection?
I have seen examples of that over the last year.
Can you say what your budget does for CTE, career and technical education? You mentioned that.
Happy to do so. I'll talk about the budget proposal, which is an $183 million increase over the 22 enacted level. But I want to talk more globally that this has to be a big part of how we reimagine schools. Career and technical education has often been pushed aside, and it's a 4 years or bust mentality. We need to change that. We're going to change the culture of that. We're going to create better pathways in our schools. This is a bipartisan issue. Every state that I visited is working on this, but we have pockets of excellence, sir. And we want to make sure that states have access to great programs, funding to make sure that the connections with the employers is there, and that we can support good career technical education in our schools.
Can you say a word about how important it is for states and districts to collect data so we can know which students to help and how we can deal with the achievement gaps?
Sure. Data collection, in particular after the pandemic, is critically important. We know everyone was affected by the pandemic, but not everyone was affected equally. And in order for us to utilize the resources of the American Rescue Plan for the next couple of years, we have to know which students were impacted the greatest. And the funds need to make sure that we're addressing the inequities that were made worse during the pandemic. So collecting data, not only on student outcomes and achievement, but also on their ability to learn. Are they coming to school? Do they have other issues at home? Are they in need of support additionally from academics? Critically important for us to move forward.
And that data is required under the Every Student Succeeds Act. And finally, what are you doing to deal with the fact that the public schools now are segregated now as they were in the 1960s?
We're promoting and supporting programs that are aimed at removing those racial isolation, racial barriers between schools, promoting magnet programs that make integration of students a core tenet of their school's programming. And we're going to continue to do that. But we're also going to make sure that we recognize and we work with our stakeholders that are non-education stakeholders to look at housing patterns that also impact where students attend schools. Students learn best in a diverse community, and it's really important that we promote that as a positive thing.
Thank you. My time has expired, and there be no other members seeking recognition. We'll say that pursuant to committee practice, materials for submission for the hearing record must be submitted to the committee clerk within 14 days following the last day of the hearing. That means by close of business, June 9th, preferably in Microsoft Word format. Only a member of the committee or an invited witness may submit materials for inclusion in the hearing record, and the materials must address the subject matter of the hearing. Please submit materials to the clerk electronically by emailing submissions to edandlabor.hearings@mail.house.gov. Again, I want to thank Mr. Secretary, for participating.
Mr. Chairman, will we have closing statements?
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, I want to thank the secretary for his participation today. Members of the committee will have some additional questions for you, and we ask that you please respond to those questions in writing. The hearing record will be held open for 14 days in order to receive those responses. I remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, witness questions for the hearing must be submitted to the majority committee staff or committee clerk within 7 days. The question submitted must address the subject matter of the hearing. I now recognize the ranking member for her closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And pardon me, I appreciate the secretary being here today. I particularly appreciated his comments about reimagining the schools to include pathways to careers. As the secretary knows, he and I have spoken several times about his background, the fact that he has a technical background, I think gives him great background for what he's done, for what he could do as the secretary, and I appreciate that very much. If you're going to reimagine schools that way, I think you give some comfort to parents. But if you're reimagining schools in other ways, I think that is a great concern. And in one way, I am concerned about the possibility of reimagining schools is what might happen with Title IX. We didn't talk very much about Title IX, but I think, Mr. Secretary, you know this topic is generating intense interest across the country on all sides of the issue. I know my constituents are concerned that your actions are going to subject their sons or daughters to potentially life-altering and irreversible medical procedures without any parental involvement. And we worry that that's one of the ways you're going to reimagine schools and what the schools are doing. I'm going to ask you to commit, and I know you can't answer questions in my closing comments, but ask you to commit to personally briefing both the Republicans and the Democrats on the committee on any proposal that you put forward on Title IX to reassure us that this is not one of the ways you're going to be reimagining the schools. Mr. Secretary, I was very interested in the way you talked about having honesty and transparency coming from colleges and universities and from charter schools. And you've asked us to work with you. Mr. Secretary, we want that same kind of honesty and transparency from the department and accountability. But what we see happening is that the department is pushing through illegal shifting of responsibility from the person who took out the loan for college to hardworking taxpayers who did not get an advantage of even attempting to get a degree. Mr. Good questioned you about who do you think should be paying for those college debts. He never got an answer from you. But the term forgiveness is just a euphemism for pushing off from the person who assumed the debt to taxpayers. That's what it is. Let's call a spade here. Forgiveness means you don't pay back your loan and the public eats that loan. You talked about, again, transparency and accountability on admissions. Well, let's be a supporter of accountability and transparency everywhere, not just for certain segments of education, but for all segments of education. But most importantly, Mr. Secretary, we need transparency and accountability from the Department of Education. And we're not getting that right now. We cannot get straight answers from you. So we're having to turn to other agencies like the GAO to get information you already have in your possession, but you refuse to give us. And as I've said to you, Mr. Secretary, I think you have the capability of being as good a Secretary of Education as any person who has ever been in that position. However, I do not believe you're living up to your potential. And it may be that you don't have the authority to do what you need to do, but you are in the position and you should be held accountable for providing that information from the people who report to you. So we want to work with you, Mr. Secretary. I've told you that from the very beginning, but I cannot work with somebody who hides what it is that he's doing. And I looked up a quote a few minutes ago to see the issue of truth and silence. And I don't know where this quote came from. I'll find it, the source, because I'm big on sources. But the source, when I went to Google, it's the name of the person is Yevgeny Yevtushenko. When truth is replaced by silence, then silence is a lie. So we cannot trust that we are getting the information that we should be getting in our role in oversight. When we get silence back, our assumption is that you're not giving us the information because there's something you're hiding, Mr. Secretary. Remove that feeling from us, Mr. Secretary. Give us the information that you have so that we don't believe that silence means there's a lie there or something you want to hide. That should not happen in our government. The public is getting more and more distrustful of our government. That is not healthy for a republic. And we want you to help us keep that distrust from occurring. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to make a closing statement. And I look forward to getting the information we're requesting, Mr. Secretary. God bless you.
Thank you. And I now recognize myself for the purpose of making a closing statement. I want to thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Today, we reflected on the administration's work to expand access to high-quality education, K through 12 and higher education, and help students recover from the pandemic and succeed. Notably, the Department of Education has helped reopen the schools to full-time in-person learning safely. They've helped address persistent educational disparities and ensured that our student loan program can deliver on its promise to students. Simply put, the Department of Education has taken historic steps to get us back on the right track. However, we know that a lot more needs to be done in the future to improve the lives of our students, educators, and communities. So, Mr. Secretary, I look forward to working with you as we deliver on the promise of education and ensure that every student in America can reach his or her full potential. So thank you again for your time. And again, we look forward to working with you. And if there's no further business to come before the committee now stands adjourned.